Lilith grew up in a city of beauty and brilliance, alive with sound, scent, and color. Every morning she would stroll to the bakery, eager for the warmth of freshly baked buns and the hum of familiar voices. By trade, she was a jeweler, crafting delicate treasures that sparkled in the hands of lords and ladies. Then, one dreadful day, it came. A deep rumble shuddered through the ground, the earth trembling beneath her feet. Dust rose in choking clouds, staining the sky a haunting shade of orange. Buildings crumbled like sandcastles in a storm. Fire burst from every corner, devouring all in its path, until the city, her home, and the lands beyond were swallowed whole. Darkness fell. The once vibrant streets now held only silence and decay. The only lights that remained were the faint, flickering souls of the lost pale echoes wandering aimlessly through the ruins. For years, Lilith searched for a way out. She roamed the pitch-black wasteland, guiding lost souls back to the hollow city. But one day, a familiar rumble filled the air, a terrible sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then, like a storm of despair, new souls began to rain from the sky. Again and again, the cycle repeated. Each time the world was buried anew, Lilith's fury grew. She swore to find the one responsible, the being who condemned creation to burn and fall again and again. With every new circle of hell she traversed, she uncovered more of the truth behind the devastation. At last, in the 9th circle, she found it. Before her loomed a massive castle, veiled in shadow, a twisted echo of her former home. The light of the souls within had been corrupted, now radiating only darkness and sorrow. Anger burned within her as she climbed the shattered steps. Without hesitation, Lilith crossed the threshold and vanished into the darkness within. I have not met a demoness so confident. A cold voice murmured from the shadows. A tall, slender woman emerged, her eyes black as midnight, her skin the color of ash. When she moved, her form seemed to blur, as if she flowed like smoke caught in a breeze. "And who might you be?" the demoness demanded, her gaze sweeping over the ruined hall. "What have you done with my city?" The woman clicked her tongue and wagged a finger in playful reproach. "Your city? Oh, no, my dear. This is my city now. I am the Queen of Death. This is my kingdom. And you," she said with a cruel smile, "are now my property. I'd like to see you try." The demoness hissed. The queen snapped her fingers. From the corners of the room, wraiths surged forth, twisted, shrieking things of shadow and hate. The demoness met them head-on, tearing through their incorporeal forms with raw fury. One fell, then another. But for every wraith destroyed, 2 more emerged, larger, stronger, faster. Soon she was surrounded, her growls giving way to a roar of rage as darkness swallowed her whole. When the battle ended, she was dragged, bloodied and broken, into a dungeon deep beneath the earth. The door slammed shut behind her, sealing her in a silence so complete it devoured sound itself. When there is no light, no breath, no life, time ceases to exist. She didn't know how long she lingered in that void before her first visitor arrived. A small spider crawling across her hand. It paused for a heartbeat, then continued on its way. Once, she might have brushed it aside, but now, it was the first living thing she had seen since the end. Each day, the spider returned, and each day, she whispered to it her dreams of vengeance, her promise of freedom. One day, as she held the tiny creature close to her face, the sound of iron echoed through the corridor. Guards burst into her cell. The spider fled into the shadows as she rose to meet them, eyes burning with defiance. Demoness was bound and dragged into a chamber, swallowed by shadow. Above, a vortex yawned, the veil torn through which darkness flowed like smoke. At the far end, the queen watched with a smug, satisfied smile, savoring the hatred in the air. Beside her loomed a shape of living night, its outline shifting and hungry. "This, my lord, is my attack dog Demoness," the queen declared. The thing beside her answered. Its voice was many voices speaking at once, a chorus of whispers and screams that tasted of rot. It exuded malice and an ancient despair as it spoke the cause of her suffering. "It is the divine's will that you suffer," it intoned. "It is the divine's will that all perish and be forgotten, damned to these hellscapes for all time." Rage, pain, and venomous fury surged through her. She lashed out, shredding the nearest guards with a brutal, animal ferocity, bones cracking. Armor torn until the room was a spray of blood and metal. "Who do I kill? What must I do to stop this?" she roared, stalking toward them. "Tell me, divine." The shadow thing raised a hand. The world tilted, and she collapsed as if pinned by invisible stone. A crushing weight held her to the floor, stealing breath and motion. "I am the Dark Lord." The void being breathed as it leaned close. A cold so absolute rolled off it that her skin felt like ice. "Remember me. I am of the veil." Its voice dropped to a sibilant whisper that slid into her bones. "Kill the divine. Destroy the mortal world. Free yourself." A promise of release gleamed like a razor edge through her fury. "I will do as you say," she growled. "The mortal realm will fall." At her words, the pressure eased. She pushed herself up, chains clinking, and regarded the two figures with a hard, new purpose. "Now go," the queen commanded, voice flat with command. Demoness fled the castle, rage and purpose pounding through her veins. The command echoed in her skull as a curse. "Kill the divine. Destroy the mortal realm." She tore through a canyon of shadow, her footsteps echoing against the stone, each one a defiant heartbeat in the silence of the void. Then she stopped. Before her stretched a vast silvery web, glinting faintly in the dim, unnatural light. She bared her teeth and lunged forward, clawing and tearing at the threads. But the harder she fought, the tighter they pulled. Strands, like spun steel, coiled around her arms, her wings, her throat. "Let me go!" she roared, thrashing, every muscle burning with fury. The web quivered, but did not break. She never saw the movement above her, the whisper of legs, the glint of fangs. A colossal black widow descended from the darkness, its abdomen pulsing with a dim, blood-red glow. There was a flash of pain, searing, blinding, and then nothing, only darkness. The sun slipped beneath the horizon, setting the sky ablaze with streaks of gold and crimson before fading into indigo. A faint, chill breeze swept through the clearing, bending the grass in slow, rippling waves. From the forest beyond came the symphony of night, the steady rhythm of crickets, the low croak of frogs, the unseen rustle of creatures stirring in the dark. Then a woman stepped into the clearing. She looked to be in her 40s, her face worn and pale. In her arms, she carried a small bundle, a baby, wrapped tightly in blankets. The child did not move, did not cry. She walked to the center of the clearing and knelt in the grass. Her head bowed low over the lifeless form in her arms as silent tears fell to the ground. For a long time, she didn't move or speak. The world itself seemed to hold its breath. The breeze faded, the crickets stilled. The forest fell silent, as though smothered by an unseen hand. Heavy clouds rolled across the sky, veiling the moon. The woman's breath caught. Slowly, she lifted her head, eyes wide, shimmering with both hope and fear. She said nothing. Soft footfalls echoed in the distance. Then came the faint skittering, a sound like dry leaves scraping across stone. The steps grew closer, multiplying, until it seemed the ground itself crawled with life. Shadows darted through the grass quick, silent shapes brushing against her skirts, against the child she held. Still, she did not move. Then, as suddenly as it began, the sound withdrew. Silence fell once more. The clouds parted, and moonlight spilled over the clearing, revealing a vast, silvery web spanning the field. The woman knelt at its center. All around, dark forms crouched at the web's edges, spiders, dozens of them, their eyes gleaming like scattered jewels. The woman did not notice the eyes watching her from the trees, nor the countless shadows shifting in the dark. Her gaze was fixed on a single shape, emerging from the forest, the source of the heavy, deliberate footfalls. A gigantic spider stepped into the clearing, parting the tall trees as easily as reeds in the wind. Its carapace glistened like obsidian beneath the moonlight. This was Arachnavar, the widowmaker feared by some, worshipped by others. She halted before the kneeling woman. Her enormous fangs quivered at the scent that filled the air, releasing a drop of venom that struck the earth with a dull thud. Everything it touched withered instantly. The woman froze, holding her breath, then released it in a trembling sigh, but did not flinch. A voice rose from the spider, soft yet menacing, echoing through the clearing. "Why are you here, child?" For the first time since she had entered the field, the woman moved. Her voice was weak, shaking with despair. "Please, mistress, I beg you, please, help my baby." Arachnavar's black eyes gleamed. "It is dead," she said simply. "That is the shell that was your child. Please." The woman whispered again, tears streaking her face. "I can't live without her." The silence that followed was suffocating. Even the wind dared not stir. Finally, the spider spoke again, her tone unreadable. "You want that shell to live. She is my child," the woman sobbed. "With all that I am, I need her alive." "Then give me the child," Arachnavar said, her voice suddenly smooth as silk. The woman hesitated only a moment before unwrapping the blankets. The tiny arms fell limp, the skin pale and cold as stone. She lifted the child high, an offering to the monstrous goddess before her. A sob escaped her lips as she lowered her head and closed her eyes. Quickly, Arachnavar took the tiny form and pierced the child's chest with a single fang. A sharp crack echoed through the clearing as she began to weave layer upon layer of shimmering silk until the baby was sealed within a small cocoon. When her work was done, the great spider lowered the silken bundle back into the mother's trembling hands. "The child will live," Arachnavar said, her voice low and smooth as silk. "But the child is mine now. Whatever soul takes that husk, you will accept it with gladness, and you will raise it as though it were your own." The woman's body began to shake, making the vast web quiver and sway. Yet none of the surrounding spiders moved. "Thank you, mistress," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Thank you with all my heart. There will come a day when I claim my child," Arachnavar murmured, "and on that day your judgment will come. Raise her well." With that, the Widowmaker turned and disappeared into the forest, her countless legs whispering through the dark. The smaller spiders followed, leaving the woman alone in the clearing, clutching the silken cocoon to her chest. Day and night, she tended the cocoon with unwavering devotion. She sang to it softly, rocked it as though it was still her baby, and whispered prayers to the Spider Queen. Seasons shifted, but her faith did not waver. One night, beneath a pale moon, she felt it move. She froze. Then again, a small, deliberate twitch beneath the silk. "Yes," she gasped, her voice trembling with joy. "Yes, live. Please live." A faint sound came from within, muffled at first, then rising a baby's cry, weak but real. Tears streamed down her face as she tore at the cocoon with trembling hands, careful not to harm what lay inside. As the baby's eyes opened, they shone a bright, searing red before softening into a hue that mirrored her mother's. As the silk was peeled away, her skin shifted from a deep, demonic black to a warm, human tone. In that moment, the woman knew she recognized the soul that had taken the body. Tears blurred her vision as she clutched the tiny child to her chest. "My little girl," she whispered, "my little girl is a demoness." Demoness grew into a striking young woman, strong-willed, curious, and clever. Under her mother's guidance, she learned compassion and restraint, the difference between right and wrong. Yet there was always something untamed in her nature, a glimmer of darkness that colored everything she did. Where others saw good, she saw balance. Where others preached purity, she saw folly. Her demonic twist made even virtue seem dangerous and beautiful. Whenever she wasn't helping her mother, she wandered the edge of the dark forest, drawn by an unseen force. There was something calling to her from within the shadows, something ancient and patient, waiting. Then, one night, the voice came, soft, silken, and unmistakable. "It is time." Both she and her mother heard it. Arachnavar's whisper carried on the wind. They didn't speak of it, but they knew. The next morning, Demoness packed her things, embraced her mother one last time, and set off toward the heart of the dark forest. The deeper she traveled, the more she felt eyes upon her. Spiders crept from the bark of trees and from cracks in the stone, watching her with quiet curiosity. Instead of fear, she felt warmth, kinship even. Their movements seemed to guide her, all heading in the same direction. And so, she followed. She journeyed for days, resting where the webbed branches offered shelter. Each night, her dreams were haunted by the same vision. A shadowed figure, standing over a world in ruin, its voice echoing through her skull. Kill the divine, destroy the mortal realm. Every time she woke, it was the same, drenched in sweat, her heart racing, her body trembling. Yet beneath the fear came a strange calm, a sense of recognition she couldn't explain. For deep down, she knew these were not nightmares. They were memories. Days later, she crested a hill and paused. Below, soft lights flickered in the distance. A village, small and quiet, beneath the twilight sky. She wiped her brow, brushing away the sweat and dust of travel. "Greetings, traveler." The voice was warm and melodic. Demoness turned sharply, gripping her makeshift spear. A man in simple armor approached, torchlight glinting off his breastplate. Hey, easy," he said quickly, raising both hands. "I mean you, no harm." She studied him, eyes narrowed, body tense, then slowly lowered the weapon, though she didn't let go. "Welcome to Bloodhaven," the guard said with a nervous smile. "Would you like to come and see?" "No." Her answer was flat, final. She turned away and walked back into the dark, leaving him and the lights behind. For several days, she lingered in the hills overlooking the settlement, drawn to it despite herself. Something about the place felt wrong, or perhaps too right. From her perch among the rocks, she watched the villagers go about their lives, helping one another, laughing, working together. It unsettled her. To see mortals acting with kindness felt unnatural, deceitful. Such behavior, she thought, could not be trusted. That night, hunger gnawed at her. She tracked a Zebian, a demonic mortal who sold their soul for greed, and after a brutal struggle, drove it to the ground. Her spear shattered against its thick hide, but she tore it down with her bare hands, her claws slick with blood. Breathing hard, she searched its body first, its tunic, then its leggings. Nothing. Her stomach growled in protest, a deep, painful rumble. But then the sound grew louder, too loud to be hers. She froze. She turned toward the sound slowly. A wolf crept from the shadows, its fur bristling lips pulled back in a low, savage snarl. It lunged, and before she could react, a flash of steel split the air. The wolf fell at her feet, lifeless. Demoness spun, spear raised, her gaze darting between the corpse and the man. Standing over it, a guard, his armor gleaming faintly in the moonlight. "I mean you no harm," he said, the same voice she'd heard before. "This is Bloodhaven. We offer shelter to the lost." "I'm not lost," she lied, lowering her spear and turning away. "Then at least take some supplies," he said softly. She stopped, frowning. Kindness from a mortal? There had to be a trick. There was always a trick. Yet her hunger gnawed at her, cruel and insistent. When she turned back, he was holding out a small pack of food, smiling not mockingly but warmly. Enough to last her several days. Cautiously, she took it. Her mother's lessons whispered in her mind, and she managed a quiet, awkward "thank you." Then she turned and vanished into the forest's dark embrace. Day after day, she found herself circling closer to the village that seemed to call to her very soul. Day after day, they did not chase her away. She should hate them. They should hate her. But they didn't, and she could not understand why. Over time, mistrust gave way to friendship. That friendship deepened until the day she chose to dwell among them. A kinship took root between her and these people, strong enough that she took the blood oath. It was a sacred ritual of the brotherhood, binding blood to blood and soul to soul. She spoke the vow aloud, swearing loyalty to Voidlock Graveheart, Grand Marshal and Master of their order. She did so knowing full well that, should she ever betray them, they would hunt her without mercy. When the paladin clasped the demon's hand, searing heat ignited between them. The light of the Brotherhood waged war against the darkness of hell, and for one agonizing instant, both forces burned within her veins. Her body convulsed. Smoke curled from the point of contact, the scent of scorched flesh thick in the air. Her knees buckled, muscles locking as if caught between fire and ice. Light blazed beneath her skin, tracing her veins like molten silver. Her breath hitched sharp, ragged each exhale laced with embers. The paladin's grip tightened, unyielding. The air shimmered around them, rippling with the force of their clashing essence. A sound, low and thunderous, reverberated through the hall. When the rumbling quieted and the dust settled, her dark essence intertwined with his light, fine threads coiling around their clasped hands. The blood bond had succeeded. The blood brothers were now her kin, and Bloodhaven was now her home. It was a crisp, clear night in the village. The stars shone bright in the sky as she sat stitching a hole in her garment. She paused. The unmistakable call of Arachnavar echoed through the stillness. Looking up, her vision blurred and darkened. She was moving through a vast underground tunnel, drawn toward a great chamber. Webs coated every surface, glistening faintly, while hordes of black widow spiders scuttled in all directions. "Come, child," Arachnavar's voice whispered. She stepped forward onto the web, watching as the spiders grew still. Another step. The web was pliant beneath her feet, yet strangely not sticky. She stopped at the chamber's center as a massive spider loomed ahead. With each step it took, the web trembled and sang beneath its weight. She bowed her head. She knew better than to flee from a predator, but she prayed she would not become its meal. "Raise your eyes to me, my child," said the spider softly. "You need not fear me." Demoness lifted her gaze, her two eyes meeting Arachnavar's 8. She saw no hatred there, only cold, commanding authority. "Show me your hand, child," Arachnavar said. Demoness extended her hand, palm open. "You bear the mark of the Brotherhood," the spider murmured, brushing a leg against the glowing cut upon her palm. "Stay with them," she cooed, stroking the burn. "Learn from them." Where her touch lingered, a silken thread unfurled silver, shimmering, sealing the wound and trapping the light within. She blinked, and the chamber dissolved. She was back in her small home, her half-mended garment forgotten on the floor. Slowly, she lifted her hand and touched the mark. There was no longer the burn of holy fire, only a steady warmth pulsing from the thin, healed line. There was something she was meant to do, something important, but for the life of her, she could not remember what it was. Demoness now knew what Arachnavar looked like. In her honor, she erected a monument in the spider goddess's likeness. Spiders soon wove their webs across it, nesting within the cracks and folds of the sculpture. As their silken threads shimmered in the light, she could feel Arachnavar's presence, calm, protective, flowing through her. For the first time in years, she felt safe. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The light within her began to spread, blending with her darkness, reshaping her from within. She was becoming one of them, part of the Brotherhood. One morning, she awoke to the tolling of a bell. Rolling from her bed, the papers and tools she had worked with the night before scattered across the floor. "Hear ye, hear ye," a voice bellowed outside. She groaned, rubbing sleep from her eyes as the bell clanged again. Stepping into the doorway, she hissed softly at the glare of the morning Sunday. "Hear ye," the town crier called. "There is an emergency meeting at the town hall." Demoness blinked, watching doors open along the street as others emerged, murmuring and pulling on coats and cloaks. "Why, the emergency meeting," she called out. The crier looked at her, expression unreadable. He shook his bell once more and repeated, louder, "Hear ye, hear ye, there is an emergency meeting at the town hall." Her brow furrowed. Something was wrong. Wrapping her shawl tightly around her shoulders, she joined the others, heading toward the town square. The streets buzzed with uneasy conversation, boots and hooves clattering over cobblestone. Inside the town hall, the air was heavy with anticipation. Every face was turned toward the front, where Grand Marshal Voidlock Graveheart stood upon the low balcony, surveying the crowd. The look on his face was not one of command or pride, but of concern, weariness, and restrained dread. Demoness felt her stomach tighten. Something was very, very wrong. Demoness now knew what Arachnavar looked like. In her honor, she erected a monument in the spider goddess's likeness. Spiders soon wove their webs across it, nesting within the cracks and folds of the sculpture. As their silken threads shimmered in the light, she could feel Arachnavar's presence, calm, protective, flowing through her. For the first time in years, she felt safe. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The light within her began to spread, blending with her darkness, reshaping her from within. She was becoming one of them, part of the Brotherhood. One morning, she awoke to the tolling of a bell. Rolling from her bed, the papers and tools she had worked with the night before scattered across the floor. "Hear ye! Hear ye!" a voice bellowed outside. She groaned, rubbing sleep from her eyes as the bell clanged again. Stepping into the doorway, she hissed softly at the glare of the morning Sunday. "Hear ye! Hear ye!" the town crier called. "There is an emergency meeting at the town hall." Demoness blinked, watching doors open along the street as others emerged, murmuring and pulling on coats and cloaks. "Why the emergency meeting?" she called out. The crier looked at her, expression unreadable. He shook his bell once more and repeated, louder, "Hear ye! Hear ye! There is an emergency meeting at the town hall." Her brow furrowed. Something was wrong. Wrapping her shawl tightly around her shoulders, she joined the others heading toward the town square. The streets buzzed with uneasy conversation, boots and hooves clattering over cobblestone. Inside the town hall, the air was heavy with anticipation. Every face was turned toward the front, where Grand Marshal Voidlock Graveheart stood upon the low balcony, surveying the crowd. The look on his face was not one of command or pride, but of concern, weariness, and restrained dread. Demoness felt her stomach tighten. Something was very, very wrong. "Welcome, and thank you for coming," Voidlock addressed the crowd. His voice carried easily through the hall. "I have grave news to share." Demoness straightened, listening closely. What troubled him would surely trouble the Brotherhood, and therefore her. "In the oldest tomes of the Order of the Blood Brothers," he began, "ancient prophecies whisper of a cataclysm, a cleansing flood that would bring forth divine rebirth hidden beneath ruins. This event, known as the Omen of Oblivion, marks an end, the end of an age." Her stomach dropped. Memories flickered, visions of a city swallowed whole, of souls tumbling from a blackened sky, condemned to a forgotten hell. Once again, she felt it. That pull, that certainty that she was meant to do something crucial in these times. Yet what? She could not remember. She turned and slipped outside, Voidlock's words fading into the background. The cool night air struck her face as she lifted her gaze. A massive, blood-red moon loomed above, heavy and bright, a moon drenched in the blood of the Divine's victims, a witness to countless worlds buried in endless hellscapes. A forgotten rage stirred within her. Her fists clenched, a growl rumbling low in her throat. Then came the vision, a shadow, formless, immense, alive with darkness. "I am the Dark Lord," spoke a voice of many voices, echoing inside her skull. "Remember me," her breath hitched. She blinked rapidly, shaking her head, fighting to stay grounded, before the darkness swallowed her whole. "Kill the Divine," the voice commanded. "Destroy the mortal realm." A hand touched her shoulder. "Are you all right?" She flinched and turned. It was Moon, the village doctor, her expression filled with concern. "Yes," she lied, forcing a faint smile. "I'm fine." She looked back toward the square. The Grand Marshal had finished his address and was already leading the people toward the sacred grove. Demoness joined the crowd as it moved along, following Grand Marshal Voidlock to the sacred grove. She drifted toward the front, watching him as he carefully placed ethereal crystals, pasque flowers, and black trumpet mushrooms in a perfect, symmetrical pattern across the ground. Each piece shimmered faintly as it touched the soil. One by one, they began to glow softly at first, then brighter until a luminous path wound its way through the grove. When he finished, Voidlock stepped back, his expression solemn. "Follow the path I have set before you," he said, "one at a time, in order." A murmur rippled through the crowd. No one moved. Whispers darted from one villager to the next. Hesitation, fear, until Demoness stepped forward. At the edge of the glowing trail, she hesitated and looked toward the Grand Marshal. He met her eyes and gave a single, steady nod. She drew a deep breath and crossed the threshold. The moment her foot touched the first glowing stone, the world erupted in blinding light. She staggered back, shielding her eyes. But there was no darkness left to retreat into only endless white. "Demon!" a voice snarled, vicious and close. She spun around, but there was nothing, no form, no shadow, only the consuming brilliance. "You do not belong here," another voice roared, echoing from the opposite direction. She whirled again, baring her teeth, growling back into the void. The demonic fire in her blood ignited, heat flooding her veins. If this was her end, she would not die cowering. The light shimmered, and from its heart emerged a colossal white wolf. His fur glowed like moonlight on snow, his pale blue eyes cutting through her like blades of ice. The force of his presence drove her to her knees. His radiance pressed in around her, piercing the darkness within her chest, and then, just as suddenly, the agony softened into warmth. She gasped for breath, trembling, confusion, and relief warring within her. Slowly, she looked up at him. The wolf studied her in silence, the air between them heavy with ancient power. The brilliance around him pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat, each throb of light pulling at the shadows within her, tugging them apart, reshaping them. "You walk a path not meant for your kind," he rumbled, his voice like distant thunder. "Your blood is tainted with the abyss, yet the light does not reject you." His gaze lingered on her trembling hands. "Why do you fight when both heaven and hell would cast you aside?" Demoness swallowed hard, the fire in her chest flickering, uncertain. "Because," she rasped, "this world is mine as much as theirs. I will not be cast aside again." For a moment, the wolf said nothing. Then his head dipped slightly, almost in acknowledgement. "You carry both curse and purpose," he murmured, "a bridge born of shadow and flame. The omen stirs, and your choice will shape the flood to come." He stepped closer, his eyes glowing brighter. "But know this, child of two fires. Light will not save you, and darkness will not spare you. Only balance will keep you whole. The world began to shatter, light splintering into shards around her. The wolf's form dissolved into mist, his voice fading into her mind. "Remember my words. When the moon bleeds again." Then, silence. The grove returned. The path glowed faintly beneath her feet. The crowd still stood at the edge, watching, whispering. Demoness exhaled shakily, the warmth of the wolf's light still thrumming in her chest. But now, deep beneath it, something else stirred, darker, older, waiting. As the last of the crowd passed through the grove, and the Grand Marshal offered thanks to Vale Scarvard for his blessing, the glowing object sank into the earth and vanished. Voidlock turned, his paladin armor catching the firelight, and strode toward the Sanguine Council building. He spoke to those who followed. "What we have done here tonight is the first half, the order within the ritual. Now comes the second, chaos, to restore balance." At his words, the gathering broke apart. People scattered in every direction, their voices echoing through the night. Demoness slipped away toward the forest. The shadows welcomed her, the only place where she felt truly safe. Leaning against a tree, she listened to the distant shouts of villagers moving through the woods. Then, a sound came from her left, a deep, deliberate rustle. She froze, eyes narrowing as a vast shape moved between the trees. "Approach, child," came the voice, calm and commanding. "Arachnavar," Demoness breathed, relief softening her tone as she stepped forward toward the massive spider. "What do I do?" "Hush now, child," Arachnavar chided gently, her many eyes glimmering faintly. "Vale Scarvard has spoken to me. He says you now carry enough light to see his path." "It was so bright," Demoness whispered, trembling. "The light, it was so sharp. It burned." Arachnavar extended a long, spined leg and rested it gently against her chest. "Because you are so dark," she murmured. For a moment, warmth spread through Demoness's body, a strange mix of comfort and pain, like light filtering through a storm. Then came the voice of the Grand Marshal, echoing through the trees, calling the faithful to return. Demoness turned toward the sound, the direction of the village, of what she knew was soon to fall. When she looked back, Arachnavar was gone. Only a few threads of silver web drifted in the air where the spider had stood. She sighed and began the walk back. The blood-red moon loomed heavy in the sky as Demoness joined her brothers and sisters of the Order at the lakeside. The air hung thick with anticipation and fear. Every soul present knew what was to come. The ground began to rumble beneath their feet. In the distance, the village collapsed into ruin, buildings crumbling as fire devoured timber and smoke bled into the heavens. Demoness watched silently. She knew this all too well. She had lived through it before. Everything she knew, everyone she had come to care for, would soon be swallowed by hell once more. Whispers rippled through the gathered ranks as the Sanguine Council stepped forward, facing the Brotherhood. "Ulvrida has warned us," one of them said, voice carrying with the calm gravity of prophecy. "To save what is worth saving, you must leave all else behind." Their eyes met hers. Demoness felt the weight of that gaze, like a blade to the heart. She lowered her head. If there truly was a way to save these people, these kin, she would do it. even if it cost her everything she had left. Then Voidlock Graveheart, the Grand Marshal, stepped forward. He lifted his sword high toward the crimson moon, the blade catching its light. Nathrandi, Keeper of the Passage, Ferryman of Shadows, he called out, his voice strong and unwavering. Grant us entry to the other side. We offer you our resolve, our courage, and the blood we have yet to spill. Guide us into the veil. His words struck the night like thunder. The air crackled alive, electric, heavy with power. Around her, the Brotherhood began to chant. Demoness joined them, her voice blending with theirs as she recited the sacred blood oath. The sound rose like a tide, swelling with ancient power. The bond took form, a living current of crimson energy that wove through the air, coiling from the tip of Voidlock's blade like a tendril of blood and light, reaching toward the unseen realm beyond. Then, the surface of the lake darkened. A dark shadow stirred upon the lake, drawn by the pulse of the blood bond. It took shape as it neared the shore, tall, elegant, terrible when it stopped before the Grand Marshal. The surface of the water stilled around it. Voidlock lowered his sword and bowed his head in reverence. Across from him, the being's eyes, two burning embers in the dark, watched him in silence. For a long moment, no one dared breathe. Then Voidlock looked up and gave a single, silent gesture to the Brotherhood. Her gaze shifted from him to the others. One by one, her ember eyes swept across the gathered blood brothers. Each member of the order reacted differently. Some bowed, some looked away, and others stood firm under her scrutiny. At last, her gaze found Demoness. The force of that stare struck like a blow. Demoness's blood burned in her veins as the shadow's voice split the air, sharp as a wolf's bite. You do not belong here. Demoness flinched, but did not retreat. She met those blazing eyes with her own and growled, the darkness in her voice rising to meet the challenge. I belong to them, she snarled. And they belong to me. We are kin bound by blood. I will not allow them to die like the others. A flicker of something passed across Nathrandi's face. The corner of her mouth curved upward, amusement, or perhaps approval. Then the lake rippled again. A vast presence emerged beside her, tall and radiant where she was shadow. Demoness knew him instantly. Veilskarvard, Keeper of Light, twin to the Shadow Ferryman. He turned to his sister first, then to the Grand Marshal. Without a word, he lifted his staff. A burst of blinding white light flared, spilling across the gathered warriors. It wrapped around them in threads of brilliance, a protective shroud woven to guard their souls from being lost to the veil. They both stepped aside as an old boat drifted from the rift, its hull blackened with age, runes glowing faintly along its frame. It glided soundlessly toward the shore, the water beneath it rippling with ghostly light. The Brotherhood climbed aboard, each member solemn and silent. Nathrandi took her place at the stern, her ember eyes fixed on the horizon. With no command spoken, the vessel began to move smooth and steady across the dark water and into the waiting rift. As they entered the veil, the air changed. It grew cold, then heavy, then alive, with a presence that pressed against their souls. All sound faded into a dead, muffled quiet. The faint glow of the mortal world behind them collapsed into an endless black. No one spoke. The only movement was the slow glide of the boat across the inky surface. Now and then, a faint shimmer appeared beneath the water. A pale hand, a face, a flicker of light. The souls of the lost rising briefly toward them before sinking again into the depths. When the boat finally touched the opposite shore, it did so with a whisper, skidding softly against the gravel. The Brotherhood disembarked, careful not to disturb the dark waters. Voidlock turned and bowed low. "Thank you, Nithrandi." The shadow ferryman inclined her head once before dissolving into mist. The boat vanished soon after, sinking silently into the Vale's surface. There was now no way back. The air hung thick with dread. Their footsteps echoed unnaturally loud on the gravel as they moved forward into the mist. Then came the sound, faint at first. Then rising a rustle, a whisper, a growl from the dark. Shadows began to move around them, circling, closing in. The air thickened as shapes emerged, demons and soul eaters, drawn to the warmth of living blood, their hollow eyes burning with hunger. One lunged. Voidlock turned, his shield flashing as it caught the blow. The creature screamed as his blade pierced it, bursting into vapor that dissolved into the gloom. "With me!" called the Grand Marshal, and the battle for life and light began. Shadows rose against the Brotherhood, only to fall beneath their iron will. And steel blades, with every victory, they moved forward. With every victory, the shadows grew angrier, more vicious, more desperate. Demoness fought among them, like a creature reborn, snarling, striking, her claws and blade a blur as she tore through the dark at her pack's side. Then, from the mist, the wraith stalkers emerged, tall, spectral figures gliding across the battlefield. They circled the warriors, their movements silent and deliberate, cutting the group apart piece by piece. A low growl rumbled from Demoness's throat as one of them began to circle her. "You are a failure," the wraith hissed. "A demon fighting for mortals. Have you grown soft on the surface?" She crouched low, muscles coiled, eyes burning. The wraith lunged. She leapt aside, its claws missing by inches as it slid to a stop, turning to circle again. "You were sent to destroy the mortal realm," it spat, voice like broken glass. "You were supposed to open the way for us to reign over all creation." The creature froze, realizing it had said too much. That instant of hesitation was all she needed. With a roar born of fury and defiance, Demoness struck. She slammed into the wraith, claws rending, fangs tearing. Shadows and ichor sprayed across the ground as the creature screamed, its form unraveling beneath her rage. When the silence returned, only blood and smoke remained. She rose, chest heaving, the stench of death thick around her. Her fangs dripped, her claws gleamed red. When she rejoined her pack, she looked less like the woman the Brotherhood had come to know, and more like the demon hell had forged. But this was not the demon who had once destroyed. This was the demon who protected. She tore at shadows and demons alike, as she locked her shield with her pax, pushing forward through the never-ending onslaught of corrupted souls. When one faltered, another howled encouragement. The pack stayed firm. The pack stayed strong, and with Voidlock Graveheart, the Grand Marshal at their head, the pack never wavered. Demoness fought for these mortals, with every fiber of her being, with every ounce of her strength. The darkness would not take them while she existed, for a demon is never truly dead, yet never truly alive. They linger in limbo, and in that limbo she would stand guard, shielding these souls from being consumed. She would follow them to the ends of oblivion, if that's what it took to keep them safe. A cheer erupted as a faint light appeared in the distance. "Forward!" Voidlock shouted over the chaos. The demons screamed in rage. The shadows whipped themselves into a frenzy, tearing at armor and rending flesh. The stench of blood filled the air. Sharp and metallic, it pulled at something deep within her, something ancient and terrible. The memory of the sacred grove flashed before her eyes. "No!" Demoness roared, fighting harder and faster, her fury burning like white fire. She would drag them all to the light, or perish trying. Then, impact. The air left her lungs in a violent rush as something massive struck her, hurling her backward. She hit the ground hard, skidding through the dirt before forcing herself up again. She barely took 2 steps before another blow crashed into her back, slamming her face first into the ground. Snarling, she tried once more to rise, but this time a crushing weight pinned her down. Cold claws pressed into her shoulders, holding her fast. Demoness rolled over, gasping, and looked up into the hollow face of a towering wraith, one of the Queen's personal guards. "My attack dog has been very naughty, it seems," came a familiar, cold voice. The Queen stepped from the shadows, her presence swallowing the light around her. She gazed down at Demoness with the faintest curl of amusement on her lips. "They will not die here," Demoness hissed, straining against the wraith's crushing grip. "Oh, but they will," the Queen replied smoothly, her eyes glinting like black glass as she turned to watch the carnage. The demons tore into the mortals, their screams echoing through the veil as the Brotherhood fought to reach the light. "No!" Demoness roared, jerking free of the wraith's grasp and lunging at the Queen. In a single, effortless motion, the Queen of Death summoned a spear of shadow and drove it straight through Demoness's chest. The world fell silent. Demoness fell to her knees, clutching at the spear. It should have pierced her heart. It would have pierced her heart if Arachnavar had not taken it from the lifeless infant's body on the night of the offering. As Grand Marshal Voidlock Graveheart led the survivors through the light to the other side, Demoness could feel the shadow spear burning through her, destroying the light and love she had learned while among the Brotherhood, tightening the dark chains that bound her to the Queen of Death. Then, a blinding light burst from her chest, scattering everything around her. The shadow spear glowed white-hot, then shattered into fragments. Air rushed back into her lungs in a single, violent gasp. Vale Skavard's ward still protected her. The Paladin's divine mark burned bright, shielding her soul from being claimed by the Veil. Demoness turned toward the light, just in time to see the last of the pack step through. With the glow still burning bright in the wound on her chest, she ran as fast as she could toward the shrinking gateway and leapt. She burst through the veil, a heartbeat before it sealed shut. "I will find you," she heard. "I will come for you." She landed heavily on cool, soft grass. There was no light here, no moon, no stars. Only the low hum of ancient rituals buried in the soil, and the hushed whispers of the dead. The memory of the queen and the battle faded like smoke as Demoness forced herself upright, scanning the darkness for signs of life. Varl, that was Moon's voice. She was sure of it. Demoness staggered toward the sound, picking her way through the shadows. Ahead, a faint orange flicker cut through the gloom, a small campfire surrounded by huddled figures. She approached quietly, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. Blood oozed from gashes and punctures across their bodies, mingling with sweat, dirt, and the black ichor of slain demons. Their faces were gaunt, their eyes hollow, the look of survivors who had seen too much. Not all had made it through. The scent of blood and suffering drew movement in the dark. Shadows gathered, circling above them like vultures, hungry for what remained of the Brotherhood's strength. Demoness bared her teeth, stepping forward with a guttural snarl. These mortals were hers. The shadows hesitated, shifting and hissing. They darted in from the edges left, right testing her resolve. But every approach was met with a furious, possessive growl. She would not let them fall. "Not after everything. Let us have them," the shadows hissed. "They are mine." Demoness roared back. "They belong to me." One of the shades darted forward, and she struck. Her claws ripped through its form, tearing the wraith apart before hurling its fading remnants back into the dark. The corpse hit the ground with a whisper and vanished. "Lots of voices," Tor muttered, his tone tight. "For such a tiny world." At that, the shadows hesitated, then melted back into the blackness, their whispers fading into the hum of the dead earth. Demoness paced the edge of the firelight, her claws twitching, eyes glowing faintly. She stayed half in darkness, half out, a creature caught between two worlds. "Perhaps we got separated," Gwydion murmured, glancing toward the tree line. His gaze brushed her shadowed form, uncertain, searching as though he could sense her there, even if he couldn't truly see her. She froze. Even like this, her form monstrous, her chest still burning from the Queen's strike, they still felt her. These mortals, these strange, fragile creatures. How could they inspire such loyalty, such warmth, even in one born of fire and ash? "The veil did not claim us this day," said Voidlock, his voice low and steady. "We have passed through the very depths of hell and endured." Demoness exhaled slowly, the sound a mix of relief and sorrow. The images of the battle still flickered behind her eyes. The Queen, the wraiths, the dying cries of those she couldn't save. The blood, the fury, the light she had fought so hard to protect. This hollow. Voidlock Graveheart's voice cut through the silence, low and wary. Something still has a hold on it. He turned slowly, his armor faintly glowing with residual light from the veil. "The veil will not let go so easily." Demoness froze. His words clawed at the back of her mind. "The veil will not let go." She looked down at her hands, dark tendrils of shadow coiling faintly beneath her skin. She was of The veil. She was its echo, its remnant, its stain upon the world. And if the veil lingered here, then perhaps it lingered because of her. The thought chilled her more than any darkness could. Nearby, Isenborn tightened his grip on his blade, scanning the tree line. "Who goes there?" he barked. "Oh, hell no," Demoness muttered under her breath, taking a cautious step back. "I don't want to fight you." She hoped he could hear. Her hoped something of her voice carried through. "Are we actually out of the veil?" Gwydion asked, his voice tense. "I pray this is not one of Umbravix's tricks." Demoness crouched low in the shadows, her instincts warring. She didn't belong among them, not like this. But she couldn't abandon them either. So she watched, silent and unseen, circling the edge of their firelight like a restless guardian. "There are shadows lurking beyond the edge of our light." Isenborn's shout cut through her thoughts. His blade flared to life as he turned directly toward her. Voidlock raised a hand, his tone sharp, commanding. "No, the darkness will not claim us this day." Demoness sighed, pacing along the edge of the light. How was she supposed to tell them she was here, that she wasn't their enemy? Finally, she whispered softly, carefully, each of their names. "Gwydion," he froze, head snapping toward her. The others stirred uneasily. "You," Gwydion said, stepping closer, his eyes narrowing. "How do you know my name?" "It's me, Demoness," she shouted into the darkness. "You need to see me. You need to know I'm here." "Wait," Fedril called out. Did anyone else hear that? Tor drew his weapon, his voice trembling with fury. "Silence, you foul demon!" Voidlock surged forward, his blade flaring with light as he plunged into the dark. The shadows hissed and recoiled, vanishing into the trees where his sword passed. "There are shadows about," Moon said urgently. "Can you summon your light to hold them at bay?" "No," Moon cried suddenly, startling even herself. She blinked and looked down at her own spear as a faint shimmer of light danced along its tip. Did that just happen?" Demoness pressed her palm against the wound in her chest, feeling the faint warmth still pulsing there. She could sense the connection between them, the veil's residue, the bond forged through blood and fire. Maybe what Moon saw, she saw too. "This place carries the scars of the veil," Voidlock said grimly. "We must cleanse it and claim it for the Order." "Moon," Gwydion said softly, "is that you out there?" Moon turned toward the voice, her eyes scanning the shadows. Demoness could feel her warm, searching energy brushing against her presence like a hand in the dark. "I can't see you," Moon murmured, stepping forward. "But I can feel something." "It's me," Demoness said quietly, her voice trembling. "It's Demoness." Moon froze just a few paces away, her eyes unfocused, still searching through the gloom. Slowly, Demoness reached out and placed her hand on Moon's shoulder. Moon gasped, a flicker of light passing across her face, and her gaze stilled. Recognition replaced fear. Demoness waited, silent, hoping that the light in Moon's eyes was not dread, but understanding. "Let us sanctify this land and cleanse the shadows from within this hollow," declared the Grand Marshal, his voice carrying with the authority of command and faith. All eyes turned to the paladin. Voidlock Graveheart lowered his sword to the stone beneath his feet. He began to speak words too old, too sacred for Demoness to comprehend. From the tip of the blade, white cracks began to spread, thin as spider silk at first, then widening into radiant veins of light. The cracks fanned outward, multiplying, racing across the ground to every corner of the hollow. The light grew blinding. The shadows screamed as it reached them, their forms twisting and writhing before dissolving into black mist. Demoness hissed and darted away from the spreading fractures, desperate to avoid their searing touch. This was no light meant for her kind. Voidlock's voice rose to a thunderous final word, and he drove his sword deep into the stone. A shockwave of pure radiance erupted outward. Demoness was hurled through the air, the scream torn from her throat as pain tore through her body. The light burned her essence, unraveling her connection to this realm, even as it expelled the darkness from the hollow. And return. Gone. She heard Voidlock's voice echo faintly, distorted as the world began to unravel. Then came the silence. Demoness drifted between worlds, between Bloodstone Hollow and the Shadow Realm. There was no time here, no light or dark, only the endless void. And yet, a tether remained. The faint pulse of her bond with the Brotherhood kept her from fading entirely. Void, the voice pierced the silence. Mune's voice clearer than all the others. "It's a message," she said, though Demoness couldn't tell to whom. Whispers followed, encircling her like a wind that wasn't wind. The language was strange, not of the hells or the mortal realms. Something ancient, something other. They, too, protected. That voice, faint but familiar, Genesica. When light fails, shadows remain. Mune's voice echoed through the void, soft at first, then clearer. Seek the heart. Sever the chain. Fragments of another voice broke through the dark. Stone. Place. She recognized Voidlock. His tone was strained, distant, as though shouting across eternity. This Bloodstone Hollow, push back, resides here. Will claim ours. Flashes of light split the darkness. The faint clang of armor. The deep hum of consecration. Then, no evil this place. Draw breath. His words crackled and flickered, as if the veil itself tried to smother them. Demoness could hear the rising voices of the Blood Brothers, the chorus of warriors swearing their oaths. In the Blood Brothers came Voidlock again, stronger this time. I swear, I will. This oath, blood be, betrayal, for glory, brotherhood. My blood, this oath. Another shockwave tore through the void. It rippled through her, setting every fragment of her being alight. The whispers of the darkness surged, clawing at her, trying to drag her back, their voices a cacophony of rage and hunger. But something stronger pulled at her, now a golden thread burning through the void. In the name of the Blood Brothers, Voidlock's voice rang out, full and clear this time, blazing with conviction. The bond flared in her chest. the blood oath itself pulsing like a heartbeat. Demoness gasped as the pull of the Brotherhood began to overpower the veil's grip. She reached for the sound, for the warmth of that name, and began to move, inch by inch, through the storm of whispers and shadow. Tonight, this night, we cleanse this place. In the name of the Blood Brothers, I reaffirm my vow to all of you, and to our order, the Blood Brothers. As she reached toward Voidlock's voice, the pull of the veil intensified, tugging at her soul with cruel insistence. Through blood we are bound. We stand united as one. In loyalty and honor's fire, our bond is forged, our hearts tempered true. By my blood, I swear this creed, my loyalty to the clan. I'll shed my last drop before I yield, to protect this bond that forever shall reveal, for honor, for glory, and for the Brotherhood. By my blood, I swear this creed. His final words rang like trumpets through the void, blazing against the dark. Demoness screamed, her body and spirit stretched between the veil and the mortal realm, until, with a violent jolt, she fell hard onto cool stone. Her chest heaved. The sound of her own breath was the sweetest noise she had ever heard. She was back-broken, bloodied, but alive in Bloodstone Hollow. In the days that followed, Demoness withdrew into the deep forest. The wounds of both body and spirit ran too deep for mortal eyes to see. There, with the spiderlings of Arachnavar as her silent companions, she began to build. The temple of Arachnavar rose slowly, spun from silk and stone, shadow and devotion. When at last the goddess herself came vast, graceful and terrible, she perched upon the temple's edge and regarded Demoness with countless gleaming eyes. Then, with a gesture both alien and tender, Arachnavar shed one of her skins and draped it over her servant. The spiderlings cocooned Demoness in the sacred husk each time she rested, mending the wounds the light had burned into her and preserving what remained of her mortal shell. She knew the Brotherhood could never see her thus wrapped in divine silk, neither living nor dead. To them, she would look corrupted, a Zebian husk. They would strike her down without hesitation. I must make a pilgrimage to see Arachnavar, she would say quietly. I need to go see her. But every time Demoness rose to leave Bloodhaven, her resolve faltered. She could not leave her kin. She owed the Brotherhood everything, her freedom, her purpose, her heart. How could she be at Arachnavar's side and still stand among her blood-bound? This question haunted her more than the veil ever had. Time drifted on, and the memories of the veil grew distant, like half-remembered dreams. Demoness began to emerge into the town during the daylight once more. Her form was whole again, the spiderling's work complete, her body restored to what it had been in the old world. The people of Bloodhaven greeted her as if nothing had changed. Their laughter was warm, their kindness unshaken. For a while, she almost believed she belonged. When the day came for the Blood Brothers to journey to Storm's refuge, Demoness joined them eagerly. The road wound upward to a castle vast and gleaming, its towers brushing the clouds. Yet as she approached, her vision blurred flashes of another castle, ancient and broken, shimmered over the walls like ghosts of memory. She blinked hard, steadying herself, and continued up the path with the others. Their hosts welcomed the Brotherhood, leading them into a grand tavern to rest and drink after the long march. "Yes, please," Demoness said with a grin, accepting the offered ale. She drained it in one go, sighing with satisfaction. Ah, that hit the spot. The laughter, the clinking mugs, the warm flicker of torchlight. It all felt so human, so alive. She let her guard down for the first time in ages. She heard the crackling of fire and turned toward the sound. A pit burned brightly in the tavern's center, its flames licking across the logs in a mesmerizing dance. Demoness stared into it, lost in the hypnotic rhythm of the fire's motion. The crackling grew louder. The scent of smoke thickened. Screams echoed distant at first, then closer. The heat rose around her as walls groaned and buildings crumbled into ash. The city, this beautiful city, was being swallowed whole by flame. A hand touched her shoulder. She gasped, spinning around. The fire was calm again. The tavern whole. Laughter filled the room. Boots scraped against floorboards, and the others were heading out to explore. She exhaled slowly and followed. Storm's refuge was vast and intricate, its marble towers and carved arches gleaming in the Sunday. Demoness admired its architecture, spoke briefly with locals and spiders alike, even smiled at their warm greetings. Yet her feet led her, as they always did, toward the narrow alleys and shaded corners where the light dared not linger. Inevitably, some poor soul would stumble upon her in the dark and startle, and she'd laugh softly, amused at how easily shadows unsettled mortals. Later, she stood nearby as the leaders of the Brotherhood and the Refuge discussed trade routes and alliances. The air was calm, safe. Then, without warning, a searing pain lanced through her chest. She gasped and stumbled, clutching at her chest. The ache was sharp, familiar, too familiar. She straightened quickly, forcing her expression neutral as she scanned the crowd. No one had noticed. "All who wish to return by blood magic, form a circle here." Grand Marshal Voidlock's voice rang clear across the courtyard. Grateful for the distraction, Demoness joined the circle. She wanted to be away from this place. The smoke, the fire, every echo of her vision gnawed at her. She landed hard with the others in the circle at the homestone, the familiar hum of Bloodhaven's wards thrumming beneath her feet. Relief barely had time to form before the pain in her chest returned, sharp, burning, relentless. She staggered, but ran with the others toward Bloodhaven's gates, trying to ignore the fire spreading through her ribs. Then the world shifted. In an instant, she was back in the Vale. The air turned to ice. The Queen of Death stood before her, obsidian crown gleaming, a cruel smile curving her lips. "I'm coming," the Queen said softly, and thrust the shadow spear through Demoness's chest once more. The world shattered. Demoness screamed as she fell backward through layers of reality, crashing to the ground at the base of an ancient oak outside Bloodhaven. Her body convulsed. Her chest burned like molten iron. She could barely breathe. "Moon," she gasped, clutching at the wound as dark mist curled from her fingers. "I must tell Moon. She'll know what to do." She forced herself upright, stumbling toward the village, each step heavier than the last. "Moon," she called out as she neared the clinic, her voice raw and desperate. The healer turned, smiling at first. "Hi, Demoness." "There's something wrong," Demoness rasped, lifting her hand from her chest. Moon's smile vanished. From beneath Demoness's palm, black tendrils of shadow seeped outward, pulsing like veins of living ink. "Is this a wound from the veil?" Moon asked, her tone trembling between fear and awe. "Yes," Demoness breathed. "But I thought it was just a nightmare." Moon's eyes widened. "Fadril, help me get her to the clinic, quickly." They guided her to the bed, lowering her down gently. Demoness gritted her teeth as Moon reached for her soul, her light, to try and steady it. Demoness had to tell them, had to try. As they laid her on the clinic bed, Moon pressed her palms to Demoness's chest, reaching for her soul's light. The moment their energies touched, Demoness screamed, her body arching as the shadows surged back like a living storm. The darkness spread fast, devouring the light of the blood bond. "She's coming for me," Demoness gasped, her voice raw with terror. "Who is she?" Moon demanded, pulling her hands back from the searing corruption. She Demoness's breath hitched her eyes, went black. "Is coming." The darkness swallowed her whole. Demoness's eyes flew open. She was surrounded. Dozens of snarling, snapping demons circled her, their bodies dripping with shadow and malice. The second she moved, they attacked claws, fangs, and rage, colliding in a maelstrom of pain. Demoness fought back with feral precision. Her claws tore through flesh, her teeth met bone, her roar shook the air. Blood and black ichor sprayed across the ground. When the frenzy ended, she stood panting atop a mound of mangled corpses, her body slick with blood and shadow. She bared her teeth at the next wave, but they didn't attack. Instead, they ran. Demoness turned, confusion flashing across her blood-streaked face, just as a reaper's blade carved through her shoulder and drove her to her knees. "Ah, the attack dog awakes," came a silken voice. The Queen of Death stepped from the void, her pale features lit by the flicker of soul flames. Her presence was both terrible and enthralling. Demoness lunged, bloodlust blazing only for chains of shadow to whip around her throat and limbs, yanking her to the ground. "Ah," the Queen purred, crouching beside her struggling form. "Have you not learned your lesson, my pet?" She smiled, running a cold finger along the chain. "Don't bite the hand that feeds." Then, leaning close enough for her whisper to burn, she added, "Oh, and we've discovered that little secret of yours, severing your connection with that dear god of yours. And your little friends, too." Demoness froze. The words cut deeper than any blade. She knew she lived only by Araknavar's grace, by the blood bond of her kin, her friends, her family. Was it truly all gone? The Queen's smile widened, cruel and knowing. "Yes, you understand, don't you?" She circled her captive like a viper. "I think I'll never let you out of these chains again. You never learn." Her voice turned sharp, venom dripping from each word. "I had so much faith in my pretty little hound, that I recommended you to the Dark Lord himself. And now look at you." She slammed her heel into the floor. "Look at the mess you've made." Demoness said nothing. Still, silent, hollow. The Queen's fury flared hotter. "What am I supposed to tell the Dark Lord?" Still, no answer. "Answer me, damn you!" she screamed, snapping her whip across Demoness's back. The sound cracked through the chamber like thunder, but Demoness didn't even flinch. The Queen hesitated, whip trembling in her hand. "You have nothing to say." Demoness's eyes lifted empty, but burning with a quiet defiance. The Queen raised her arm again. "No, but I do." The voice cut through the gloom like a blade of pure light. The chamber erupted in brilliance as Grand Marshal Voidlock Graveheart stepped from the darkness, Vale Scarvard close behind, his white fur and runes blazing like the dawn. The air rippled as the light drove the shadows screaming to the corners, their aura a burning ward against the Vale's corruption. The Queen hissed and staggered back as her chains began to melt under the light. Demoness blinked against the brilliance, her mind reeling in disbelief. When all was lost, the Brotherhood had found her. "She's here! She's here!" Voidlock shouted. Just before the ceiling split apart in a storm of chittering limbs and holy fury, a massive, furious spider descended from the darkness. Arachnavar, the weaver of souls, the mother of webs. Her 8 burning eyes swept the room, and those foolish enough to stay were struck down in an instant, their screams silenced beneath her strike. "Oh, my foolish child." Arachnavar's voice reverberated through the chamber, half sigh, half thunder. "You always find your way into mischief." Her fangs glowed with divine fire as she bit through the chains around Demoness's throat. Demoness blinked in disbelief, then broke. Tears streamed down her face as she clung to Arachnavar's leg, sobbing with relief. She didn't care if the goddess scolded her for eternity. She knew now that those she loved her too. With infinite care, Arachnavar wove a new cocoon of silver thread around her child. The Vale's shadows hissed and recoiled, trapped inside the weave. "This will keep you and the mortal realm safe," the goddess murmured, sealing the last thread. Her burning eyes softened as she met Demoness's gaze. "And it will tell me, whenever someone dares to meddle with my mischievous child who cannot help but tangle herself in her own web." Demoness smiled weakly and whispered, "Thank you for everything." Arachnavar tilted her great head, then lifted Demoness's chin gently with one claw. "Do not thank me, child. Live." With that, the goddess vanished through the shattered window, leaving only the faint scent of silk and divine light. When Demoness opened her eyes again, she was lying on the clinic bed, soft lamplight flickering overhead. She heard footsteps, the familiar cadence of her kin, and a ward being undone at the door. "Demoness!" Mune's voice, bright and broken with relief. "Thank you," Demoness said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for coming after me." "What happened?" Mune asked. Her voice was soft, but strained with exhaustion and worry. Demoness sighed. They had saved her life, her soul. They deserved to know the truth about the monster they had pulled from the Vale. She spoke of her city in the abyss, of her wandering through hell's endless reaches. She told them how she had been sent to destroy the mortal realm, how Araknavar had caught her, bound her, and taught her compassion and restraint. She confessed that she was a demon through and through. Yet, with the Brotherhood, she had learned to be both light and dark. Mune's hand never left hers. She squeezed gently, her eyes warm with understanding. "You're still one of us," she whispered. The Grand Marshal stood silent for a long moment. Then, finally, "Can you walk?" Demoness hesitated, then nodded and pushed herself to her feet. Her legs trembled, but she remained standing. "Then follow me." He turned sharply and strode from the room. Demoness followed, uncertain, her heart pounding. Every step echoed like judgment in her ears. Surely now they would decide her fate. The corridor narrowed. The torches dimmed until they entered a circular chamber lined with runes and woven silks, a sacred space humming faintly with divine energy. Voidlock turned to face her. "Demoness," he said solemnly, "the Order needs you. Araknavar's light and her shadow must have a voice here. We would name you Priestess of Araknavar, Guardian of her temple, and Keeper of the Balance." Demoness froze. For a heartbeat, she couldn't breathe. They weren't condemning her. They were trusting her. Her dream of standing by Araknavar's side while remaining with her kin in Bloodhaven had come true. "The Order needs you," Voidlock said again, his gaze steady. "Do you accept?" Overcome by a flash of emotion, she cried out, "Yes! Gods, yes!" If the Grand Marshal found her outburst improper, he didn't show it. Acting as though nothing untoward had happened, he simply inclined his head and began the ancient rite, the sacred ritual of initiation for a priestess of Araknavar. The chamber filled with a low, thrumming hum, as threads of light and shadow intertwined. Voidlock Graveheart traced luminous runes along her arm, each symbol glowing with both holy radiance and abyssal depth. The threads fused into her skin, coalescing into a sigil that pulsed with living warmth, the mark of both the Brotherhood and the Spider Goddess. When the ritual ended, silence settled over the hall like silk. That night, Demoness sat beside the great Araknavar beneath the moon's pale glow. The goddess's many eyes shimmered like distant stars as Demoness traced the mark on her arm. Divine silk and shadow swirled faintly around her, living proof that light and dark could coexist. For the first time in her long, turbulent existence, her heart was at peace. She smiled, softly, leaning against the warm, chitinous side of her goddess. She knew then that she was following her destiny. This was where she belonged. In the months that followed, Demoness settled into her new role, learning to walk the delicate line between light and shadow, rather than be torn apart by it. She learned to weave silk, as the spiderlings did, her hands moving with quiet reverence as she shaped intricate webs that shimmered like starlight. She tended Araknavar's brood as if they were her own children, whispering lullabies in languages older than the veil itself. And, in time, she discovered how to gaze into the veil without risking the mortal realm. From within her temple, She cast her silver webs across the boundary between worlds, searching for the lost brothers and sisters who had fallen in the dark. When she found them flickers of familiar souls adrift in the endless black, she caught them gently in her web and laid them in oak coffins lined with silk, just as Araknavar had once done for her. Patiently, lovingly, she began to bring them back to life. Through the shimmering portal of web she had woven, Demoness could see the city she had once called home, ruined and dark, its streets lit only by the wandering glow of lost souls. So she built anew. Within the heart of the temple's shadow, she began to weave a city of her own, a sanctuary of silk and light. Night after night, she worked tirelessly, gathering every soul that still clung to hope, every spark not yet claimed by corruption. Each one she rescued was one less bound to the Queen of Death. But mercy has its price. The Queen, enraged by the defiance, unleashed her legions of demons to hunt and punish those who dared even think of life or hope. The veil trembled under their fury, and the world once more became a battlefield. The war between light and dark had begun in earnest, only this time the demon stood against the darkness. Demoness felt it the moment the war broke through in the ghostlands of Paladin, a great wave of dark power rolling over the land, steeping everything it touched in fear and dread. When the wave struck her, she gasped and clutched her chest where the shadow spear had once pierced her heart. The pain was old, but the darkness was new and stronger. She fell to her knees, the air around her thick with despair. The war was no longer confined to the veil. It would touch the mortal realm, corrupt the people, turn them against one another. They had to be warned. Forcing herself upright, Demoness stumbled forward, heart hammering. She ran through the streets of Bloodhaven, calling out to anyone who would listen. Danger comes from Paladin. The veil has broken. Some villagers turned away, muttering that she was still haunted by dreams of death. Others hesitated, unease flickering in their eyes. When she reached the Grand Marshal, she begged him to act to gather the Brotherhood, to ward the borders. Voidlock listened in silence, then placed a hand on her shoulder. "We'll send a patrol. Vale Scarvard's light still guards the realm. You need not fear, priestess." But he didn't feel it, the shadow pressing closer, the whispers seeping through the cracks in the veil. He couldn't hear the Queen's laughter echoing faintly in the wind. That night, while Bloodhaven slept, one villager came to her door. Arch. He carried a lantern and a sword, eyes hard with determination. "You weren't imagining it," he said. "I can feel it too, the pull from the veil." Together, they set out under the blood-red moon, searching the forest's edge where reality had begun to fray. Somewhere out there, the rift waited dark and alive, the Queen's gateway clawing its way open. They both knew it was only a matter of time before she herself would come through. Through the day, Demoness watched over Bloodhaven. Through the night, she roamed the borderlands, hunting the shadows that slipped through the cracks between worlds. Arch often walked beside her, his lantern light flickering against the fog. "They don't believe you," he would say quietly. "They won't join us It's too much effort for them. Demoness knew better, but doubt still gnawed at her heart. Every warning she gave was brushed aside, every glimpse of darkness dismissed as paranoia. Then, one night, they found it. A great black gate rose from the mists of the ghostlands, vast, cold, and alive. The air around it shimmered like oil, pulsing with the breath of the void. As she watched, the surface of the gate rippled. A figure emerged, tall, silent, wrapped in shadows. A demon, assassin. Without hesitation, Demoness sank into the darkness, slipping through Arachnavar's realm to avoid being seen. She knew exactly where it would go. She had warned them. It was time for Bloodhaven to wake up and smell the sulfur. She knew the instant the demon reached the village. The light flared beams of holy fire, cutting through the mist as the Brotherhood fought. She felt each strike through the blood bond, their courage pushing the creature back until, weakened and bound, it was thrown into a cell beneath the guard tower. The Grand Marshal himself questioned it. But the demon spoke only one name. "Where is Demoness?" Voidlock Graveheart refused to answer. He left the cell sealed, intending to return at dawn. But not everyone waited for dawn. When Bloodhaven fell silent and the moon hung low, Arch crept into the cell. His eyes were fever bright as he pulled a tattered tome from his cloak, one whispered to be older than the veil itself. He began to chant. Demoness, hidden in the shadows above, felt the pulse of it immediately. Dark magic, foul, reckless, and intoxicating. The demon feigned agony, writhing and hissing, letting Arch believe his spell was working. But with every word he spoke, it grew stronger, feeding on his life, draining his soul through the very spell meant to break it. And when Arch's voice faltered, the demon laughed. In his arrogance, he did not see the truth. He thought he had won. The demon whispered the gate's location, the place where the Queen of Death herself would soon emerge. Arch released the final words of banishment, believing he had destroyed it. But Demoness saw the truth as it sank back through the veil, smiling. It wasn't banished, it was sent home with a message delivered. The gate still stood, and now the Queen knew where to step through. Valskavard's wards were weakening across Paladin. The onslaught of demons crashing against the gate was relentless. Each one that clawed its way through to Bloodhaven and was forced back only gave the Queen more knowledge of the mortal realm. With every death, every banishment, the gate grew stronger. Demoness changed her strategy. No longer could she simply warn them they would not listen. Now, she would force the truth from the demons, rip the information from their very cores, and make the Brotherhood see. But despair was creeping in. The people she would die for seemed to have no instinct for self-preservation. Did they even care if they lived or died? Meanwhile, Arch had changed. He whispered poison about the gods, calling them weak, saying they had no strength left to protect the world. He began to keep strange company. A man named Isenhorn, whose voice was smooth and dangerous, whose eyes gleamed like polished obsidian. Together, they spoke of infiltrating other clans, of breeding distrust, of reshaping the world from the shadows. They tried to draw her in, to make her doubt herself, her faith, her goddess. Her mind began to unravel. When had she last seen Araknavar? Had her goddess abandoned her, or had she simply wandered too far into the dark to hear her call? Corruption bled through her thoughts like ink in water. She no longer knew who to trust. The last demon she interrogated was the strongest yet. Its power filled the room like smoke, choking and heavy. Mune fought to hold it down, her light dimming, her strength fading fast. Demoness snarled and joined the fray, fighting the way demons understood with blood, fury, and teeth. She tore into it, claws raking through shadow and ichor, while Mune struck again and again beside her. When it finally fell silent, she leaned close, her breath hot and sharp. "Tell your queen," she hissed. "I'm coming for her." She released it, letting it crawl away into the darkness. She wanted it to feel fear, to limp back to the gate and remember her. Mune, though, didn't see it that way. To her, it was all for nothing. Before Demoness could speak, Mune turned and fled into the forest, her form swallowed by the mist. Demoness called after her, but the only reply was the long, mournful howl that rose moments later from the woods. It wasn't the sound of a woman. It was the howl of a werewolf. In the days that followed, Demoness worked tirelessly beside the Brotherhood, helping to fortify Bloodhaven against the encroaching dark. Together, they sealed every road, every gate, every whispering path through the woods, until a great dome of light shimmered over the city like a living barrier. The Grand Marshal ordered guards to watch through the nights, striking down any demon that dared test the ward. Demon-hunting parties roamed the outer woods, cutting down what shadows they could, before retreating back beneath the light. But each night, the assault grew worse. Demon mages gathered beyond the walls, their voices rising in discordant chants, hurling dark sorcery at the barrier until it rippled like a storm-tossed sea. Then, with a sound like the sky itself breaking open a deafening, bone-deep boom, it happened. The Queen of Death had crossed into the mortal realm. The air grew colder, heavier. Even the stars seemed to dim. Demoness stood atop the city's rampart, watching as the people of Bloodhaven struggled under exhaustion and fear. Their eyes were dull, their words sharp. She could hear the doubt in their muttering whispers that maybe this was all her fault, that the veil had followed her here. She felt the sting of those words, but said nothing, because she knew the truth. If she didn't act now, if she didn't face the Queen herself, it would not just be Bloodhaven that fell. The entire mortal realm would burn. So, as night swallowed the city and the weary guards changed watch, Demoness made her choice. With a heavy heart and silent steps, she slipped through the streets she had come to love, past the sleeping houses and sacred shrines, beyond the glowing barrier of light. And then she was gone, vanishing into the mist and moonlight, toward the black gate and the waiting horde of demons, toward destiny. The further Demoness traveled from Bloodhaven, the darker the world around her became. The air grew thick and cold. The mists hung low and unmoving, swallowing sound and light alike. Each step forward dragged, like walking through a nightmare made flesh. The dark chains that bound her to the Queen of Death tightened with every mile, heavy, burning bands of shadow, pulling her inexorably closer to the gate that loomed ahead in the distance. She fought them at first, tried to resist their pull, but the closer she came, the stronger they became, threads of darkness snaring her limbs, her heart, her very soul. For a moment, she thought of turning back, but she could feel it faint, but unmistakable. The weakening of the Brotherhood's light. The corruption had begun to seep into Bloodhaven. Gods, even the divine, draw their strength from the faith of those who call upon them. When faith wanes, so too does their power. When devotion dies, so too does the light. And Veilscarvard's radiance, once blinding, untouchable, had dimmed to a trembling spark. That dimming had opened the way for the Queen herself to cross into the mortal realm. And now, even the Brotherhood Veilscarvard's chosen had grown numb to their god's voice, deafened by the creeping lull of corruption. Demoness's chest ached with sorrow and fury. If it was this dire in Bloodhaven, what of the rest of the realm? What of the distant cities, the wandering orders, the white ravens she could already see circling high above, hunting through the tainted winds? No, she could not falter now. Whatever the cost, she must confront the Queen of Death. She must close the gate before the mortal world was swallowed whole. For the living, for the gods, for Bloodhaven. As soon as Demoness neared the black gate, the air shifted, the mist parted, and she was surrounded. Dozens of demons emerged from the darkness, claws glinting, eyes burning like embers. Their circle closed tight, sealing off every escape. Demoness did not draw her weapon. She did not flee. She walked forward through the sea of snarling monsters, her gaze fixed upon the throne at the heart of the gate's shadow. There, upon a seat of petrified wood and obsidian, sat the Queen of Death. Her form was beautiful and terrible, lightless and regal. When she spoke, her voice was silk over blades. "Ah," the Queen murmured. "The wayward hound finally returns to her master." She rose gracefully, black silk whispering across the stones. "You led us on quite the hunt." She sighed, a sound too perfect, too deliberate, and stepped down from her throne to stand before the one who had once defied her. Demoness said nothing. She stood still as carved stone, her crimson eyes unflinching, every fiber of her being burned with the urge to strike, to tear that smile from the Queen's perfect face. But she held fast. She could not risk it. Not yet. She had one purpose: to send the Queen and her horde back through the gate, whatever the cost. The Queen tilted her head, her voice suddenly sharp as ice. "Kneel before me, little hound. Kneel before your Queen." Demoness did not move. The Queen's eyes darkened. "Kneel." A white, hot agony tore through Demoness's soul. She gasped, the unseen chains around her spirit igniting. The pain drove her to her knees, trembling. The Queen smiled, satisfied. "Now that's better." She began to circle her captive slowly, the hem of her gown whispering like a serpent in dust. "Take her," the Queen commanded at last, and turned toward the gate. The horde surged forward, their claws heavy with iron and shadow. Chains clamped around Demoness's wrists, her ankles, her throat burning with the weight of unholy fire. She was dragged forward, through the swirling black mist as the Queen of Death stepped into her realm beyond. And when the last trace of Demoness's shadow vanished into the gate, the sky split open. A blinding light erupted across the horizon, engulfing the black gate in divine fire. With a thunderous roar, Vale Scarvard's power surged forth, sealing the rift shut forever. The explosion hurled demons in all directions. The largest of them threw themselves before the Queen, shielding her from the holy light. Their bodies turned to ash, their screams echoing across the scorched wasteland. The light seared through the chains that bound Demoness, burning away the hands that held them, but sparing her. It was all the chance she needed. Grabbing the broken lengths of chain, she turned and fled into the endless dark. Behind her, the Queen's furious cry split the air. Find her. Bring her back by any means necessary. Demoness did not look back. She ran. She knew these wastelands well. This was her birthright, her hunting ground. Here, among the bones and ashes of the damned, she was not prey. She was home. Her body shifted as she ran, shadows rippling over her skin until her full demonic form emerged, wings of smoke, eyes like molten garnet, claws that carved sparks from the stone. She clutched the chains close to her chest, silencing their metallic whisper as she sped across the dunes of bone dust and ruin. At last, far from the echo of pursuit, she saw it. A half-buried village, ancient and dead, swallowed by the divine fires long ago. She slipped into what remained of a doorway, its frame blackened, but still standing, and sank to her knees inside. For the first time since the light consumed the gate, there was silence. The air was heavy, still carrying the faint scent of sanctity-burnt incense, long gone cold. Demoness rested her head against the wall and clutched the chains tighter. She had escaped the Queen, for now, but this was only the beginning. For a long while, Demoness sat in silence, listening. The ruined village was still as a tomb. No footsteps, no whisper of wings. Only the hollow echoes of the dead, wandering somewhere beyond. At last, she dared to move. She bent over the chains still clinging to her wrists, her claws working patiently at the locks. Every creak of metal seemed deafening in the silence, every scrape a possible summons for the Queen's hounds. Now, and then she paused, head tilted, as a faint moan of a passing soul drifted through the cold air. They wandered aimlessly, shadows of what once lived too far gone to notice her presence. One lock gave way with a sharp snap. The chain fell to the ground with a clatter so loud it seemed to shake the world. She froze, every muscle taut, listening. Nothing. Only the slow, empty sigh of the wind through the bones of the buildings. After what felt like an eternity, she rose and stepped outside. The hellscape stretched endlessly before her. It mimicked the mortal world in shape. There was ground, there was sky, there were horizons. But that was where the resemblance ended. The sky above burned a furious crimson, swirling clouds, illuminated by a sun that was no sun at all. a burning orb of flame wrapped around a vast black slit, an unblinking eye that watched everything beneath its gaze. She did not know to whom that eye belonged. Perhaps to one of the forgotten gods, or to something older still. She only knew that when it watched, she could feel it like claws scraping across her soul. When the eye sank below the jagged horizon, the world froze over. The air turned to ice. The firelight died, and then the true night began so dark that even her demonic sight could scarcely pierce it. Here and there, faint lights flickered in the abyss. Lost spirits, still screaming as they drifted through the black, each trapped in the echo of their final agony. She watched. Days bled into nights as she shadowed the legions, learning their ways, how they bent fallen souls, how cruelty and careful malice hardened those souls into weapons and sent them back to the overworld. She watched rituals and patrols, memorized sentry rotations, catalogued which demons feared fire and which laughed at pain. Learning became hunting. She began picking them off one by one, stalking scouts on lonely beat paths, slipping like smoke behind the sentries, cutting throats and snapping spines before the alarm could carry. The queen doubled the guard. She answered by going quieter, slipping thinner through the dark. As Arak Navar had taught her, she caught them in shadow and silk. Slowly, the ruined village became a safe house. She rewired its ruined halls with sticky silver web, with pitfalls and silent snares. At night, she crept into the compound and guided the tortured souls out, wrapping them in silk coffins and carrying them to hidden hollows until they could breathe without being dragged back to the forge. The queen grew frantic. Erratic orders, harsher punishments, bloodier spectacles to intimidate the prisoners. Demoness used the chaos to her advantage, becoming more methodical, more patient. She could not be captured. She could not afford to be. Not now. She needed the queen alone. So she devised a trap that used the demon's own hunger and the hellscape's cruel physics against them. She sabotaged forges, loosened supports beneath the molten vats, and threaded the approaches with web that would channel fleeing demons toward the pits. Then she staged an escape, a single, noisy, conspicuous break from the compound, a sham that would draw out a large hunting party and, with luck, the queen's personal guard. The air trembled with heat and hate as the queen strode forward, her silk gown sluicing over charred stone. Demoness could feel the world narrowing to the rhythm of the queen's breath, the clack of her heels, the whisper of her skirts, the hiss of shadow washing off her like smoke. The ruined plain around them pulsed with molten light. Demon corpses simmered and cracked. The reek of burning ichor thick as tar. "You will die for this," the queen spat. Black eyes, twin pits of malice. Demoness answered with a snarl and stepped off the ridge. The tide of demons surged to encircle her. Their armor shrieked as it heated. Their talons clicked on obsidian. She was small against that ocean, but she had learned the wasteland's language, its seams, its brittle spines. She had taught herself to move like a shadow and strike like a furnace. The first lieutenant lunged, bone lattice clattering. Demoness darted beneath its swing, hooking a web line through the molten railings she'd weakened earlier. The line burned bright, then held. The lieutenant's momentum threw him forward, and he fell through a sagging span into the cauldron of molten iron below. His scream was a chorus that set other demons twitching. She did not celebrate. Instead, she moved like a spider, quick, cramped, economical. She cut the anchor ropes of a second forge with a slash of claw. Molten spill took 2 more demons in a furious cascade. Each collapse was a sharp, horrible punctuation, metal and shadow shrieking as they met flame. The Queen's horde wavered. That was when the Queen struck. She stretched a hand out, and the air split. A blade of night tore forward that swallowed light itself. Demoness, dove. The blade cleaved the web where she had anchored it. A spray of molten sparks grazed her flank, and she screamed as flesh and shadow hissed. Pain flared, bitter and bright, but she kept moving. She raced between pillars of white-hot steam and coils of rearing flame, drawing the Queen's attention, baiting the huntress away from the cages where the last of the snagged souls hissed and blinked in silk-lined coffins. When the Queen tore herself free of her attendants and followed, her steps left smoking footprints. Demoness lured her across the ruined bridge she had sabotaged, stalling for the inch of time she needed. At the bridge's lip, Demoness whirled and screamed the old spider words Araknavar had taught her. Great webs, silver and heat-forged, flung up from her hands and braided with the molten flows. The Queen struck through them like a tempest, but the silk held, clinging to shadow and catching sparks. Demoness hauled with her whole body. The strand bit into the Queen's boot, snagging the hem of her robe. For a breath, the Queen staggered enough. Demoness seized the moment. She plunged forward, driving a webbed hook into molten rivet and yanking. The sabotage span groaned. A dying animal, stone cracked. With a roar, like an earthquake, the bridge snapped. A wave of metal and light cascaded into the pit. Demons who had crowded the walkway tumbled after it, their howls swallowed. The Queen teetered at the brink, silk dangling from her palms, her face a mask of outrage. For a single heartbeat, she was vulnerable, breathing hard, pulled half one way by the web, half the other by the gravity of the pit. Demoness threw herself at her, claws bared, ready to end it then and there. But the Queen surprised her. With a laugh that was a blade of glass, she seized a strand of Demoness's own shadow and twisted. Pain lanced the Demoness's chest as the old chains or their memory responded. The Queen's grasp found purchase where nothing else could. With a gesture, the Queen unraveled a mote of light from the air and flung it like a burning seed into Demoness's webbed hands. The silk smoked and snapped away. "You are mine," the Queen hissed. "Always." Black chains slithered and coiled around her like serpents made of pure shadow. "You will regret this." The Queen snarled so close, Demoness could feel her cold breath. She fought against the chains, but the more she struggled, the tighter they constricted, until pain became white-hot, suffocating agony, then nothing. When she woke, she was chained to a slab of rock in a vast, dark canyon. Below, The molten hiss of a lava river echoed up from the depths, and before her stretched a narrow land bridge leading from her prison island to a towering cliff face. For days she was left there, kneeling on the stone, thick chains connecting her wrists to the rock. She tested their weight and knew there would be no escape this time. A week passed, without food or water, before one of her kin came from Bloodhaven. Or so she thought. Its eyes were black as obsidian, as it whispered her fears back to her that the veil had proven too much, that she was no longer welcome. She tried not to listen as her heart began to break. Little by little, they wore her down her sanity, her will, her fire, until the Queen returned. This time she came with freshly converted wraiths as her personal guard. She approached Demoness, who did not bother to look up. She remained motionless at the Queen's feet, until a single shadowed finger lifted her chin. Demoness's haunted gaze met the Queen's black eyes. "Why must you put yourself through this, my dear?" the Queen murmured, voice dripping with false affection. "You're a demon. You're not supposed to have a conscience," she purred. "Come with me. End this torment." When the Queen released her chin, Demoness lowered her head again and said nothing. The Queen sighed, then paused. "And get that ridiculous web off you," she said, seizing the silken threads Arachnavar had left around her during their last encounter. As the Queen tore it away, a low rumble shuddered through the canyon, followed by a skittering sound Demoness knew all too well. The Queen didn't notice the sound at first, too intent on tearing the fine web cocoon from Demoness's body. Demoness lifted her head, her hollow eyes turning toward the noise. A faint tremor at first, then a rising, chittering tide. Hope flickered within her chest. The Queen straightened, tattered silk clinging to her claws, and froze. Her gaze followed Demoness's, and for the first time in an age, fear crossed her face. The canyon below was turning black, shifting, writhing, as a massive wave of spiders poured from the cliffs. They were all there. Everyone Demoness had known, through the mortal realm Arachnavar's brood. The young she had once fed, guarded, and named. The swarm stretched from pinhead to monstrous, a living tide of silk and fang. The sound grew a million legs scraping stone until it became a deafening storm of motion. With a sudden snarl, Demoness lunged at the Queen, chains clanging taut. Her arms stopped short, but her teeth did not. They sank deep into the Queen's hand, drawing a scream that echoed across the canyon. The Queen raised her other arm to strike and froze again. From the cliffs, spiders rained down, leaping, spilling, until they covered everything. In moments, Demoness was lost beneath them, her form dissolving into a writhing storm of black bodies that crawled and seethed across the rock. The chains hissed and smoked as Arachnavar's brood bit and spat their venom, melting iron and shadow alike. When the last links gave way and tumbled into the lava below, the swarm stilled, and from its heart, Demoness rose once more. She began to walk slowly toward the Queen, the spiders settling over her shoulders and body, until they formed a living, shadowy cloak. The Queen shrieked an order to her guards, but as soon as they drew near, the swarm engulfed them, a wave of black silk and fangs. Their screams were brief. "Don't Bite the hand that feeds. The queen stammered, stumbling back a step. You didn't feed me, Demoness growled, her voice low and feral. All you've ever done is take from me. She paused, eyes gleaming. Besides, my little ones are very hungry. The queen's face twisted with hatred and rage. She lunged, and they clashed, teeth and claws, shadow and venom. The spiders wove their webs between each strike, compensating for Demoness's weakened body, dragging the queen down. When the struggle ended, the Queen of Death lay still, whimpering, bound tight within a cocoon of black silk. Demoness stood over her, breathing hard, blood and shadow dripping from her hands. She took one last look at her fallen tormentor. Feed, little ones, she said softly. Feed until there is nothing left. As the queen's final screams echoed through the canyon, Demoness turned away. Nursing her wounds, she walked slowly toward the safe house, the sound of skittering fading behind her like a dark lullaby. Demoness slipped through the protective webbing of the safe house and stumbled inside. The souls she had rescued had made it homey cloth draped across the windows. A small fire burning in the hearth, fueled by a dense ball of web that must have been a gift from Arachnavar. Mismatched furniture had been dragged in from the ruins outside, giving the place an almost mortal warmth. She took a few steps inside, looked around, and smiled faintly before. Her legs gave way, and darkness claimed her. When she woke, she was lying on a makeshift bed, a large cloth curtain separating her from the main room. She tried to move and cried out in pain. Easy, a voice said gently. You're still recovering. A familiar face leaned over her, one of the first souls she had rescued. They lifted a bowl to her lips and helped her drink. Their form shimmered faintly, no longer as translucent as before. They were becoming a spirit, the step between what was lost and what might live again. Demoness sat up, slowly, wincing, and looked down at her bandaged wounds. Thank you, she whispered. She thought to ask how long she had been unconscious, but stopped herself. Time meant nothing here, only eternity did. The Queen of Death is gone, Demoness said quietly. You are free from her now. The soul looked at her with wide, luminous eyes. And I will find a way, Demoness added, her voice steadier, to free you from hell, too. Around her, the gathered souls and forming spirits listened in silence. For the first time since the divine had buried and forgotten them, they felt something stir within their hollow chests. Hope. Demoness slipped through the protective webbing of the safe house and stumbled inside. The souls she had rescued had made it homey. Cloth draped across the windows, a small fire burning in the hearth, fueled by a dense ball of web that must have been a gift from Arachnavar. Mismatched furniture had been dragged in from the ruins outside, giving the place an almost mortal warmth. She took a few steps inside, looked around, and smiled faintly before her legs gave way and darkness claimed her. When she woke, she was lying on a makeshift bed, a large cloth curtain separating her from the main room. She tried to move and cried out in pain. Easy, a voice said gently. You're still recovering. A familiar face leaned over her, one of the first souls she had rescued. They lifted a bowl to her lips and helped her drink. Their form shimmered faintly, no longer as translucent as before. They were becoming a spirit, the step between what was lost and what might live again. Demoness sat up slowly, wincing, and looked down at her bandaged wounds. "Thank you," she whispered. She thought to ask how long she had been unconscious, but stopped herself. Time meant nothing here, only eternity did. "The Queen of Death is gone," Demoness said quietly. "You are free from her now." The soul looked at her with wide, luminous eyes. "And I will find a way," Demoness added, her voice steadier. "To free you from hell, too." Around her, the gathered souls and forming spirits listened in silence. For the first time since the divine had buried and forgotten them, they felt something stir within their hollow chests. Hope. Demoness grew stronger over time. Her body healed swiftly, aided by the spiderlings and the regenerative force of her demonic form. Yet, though the queen was dead and her wounds were closed, she still felt it, the weight of dark chains coiled around her soul. If not the queen, then who still bound her? As she pondered this, she felt it, the burning gaze. An ancient instinct made her look up. The sky above the canyon ignited. Flame split the heavens as a vast, unblinking eye pierced through the smoke and shadow, its stare locking with hers. She tried to look away, to hide, but the gaze held her fast. It bore into her mind, through flesh and memory, down to the black core of her being. The air around her began to stir, dust fine and gray. The ash of the damned rose lazily in the stillness. "I am the Dark Lord." The voice thundered inside her skull, reverberating through every bone. "Remember me." Dread consumed her. The queen was gone, yet her soul was not her own. It belonged to something older, darker, more terrible. And now, nothing stood between her and it. "Kill the divine." The voice grew deafening, shaking the ground beneath her. "Destroy the mortal realm." Demoness screamed as black fire erupted from within, searing her from the inside out, corrupting the fragile light she had begun to reclaim. "No," she whispered, her voice breaking. Her eyes turned obsidian black, the last traces of her resistance swallowed by shadow, and with a violent burst of flame, she was hurled from the underworld, back into the mortal realm. Demoness moaned softly as she awoke, blinking against a searing light. The sun blazed above her, merciless and bright, and she hissed, shielding her eyes. After so long in hell's gloom, the mortal world felt blinding. She sat up cautiously, pain rippling through her body, and looked around. Grass brushed against her hands, green, living, soft. Insects buzzed in the warm air, and somewhere in the distance, deer called to one another. She snarled under her breath. The sounds, the scents, the colors, they all assaulted her senses, overwhelming after centuries of shadow and ash. For a long while she sat in silence, letting the world settle around her. Then, slowly, she rose to her feet and brushed the dust and ash from her skin. She had one purpose now: to kill the divine. The thought pulsed within her, steady, absolute, and she felt a pull deep in her chest, like an invisible thread tugging her forward. She followed it. She didn't know where it would lead, only that she would destroy whatever waited at the end. The black fire inside her throbbed in time with her heartbeat, whispering, urging, commanding. As she walked, the urge to kill grew stronger, burning hotter, twisting her thoughts until even the living world around her seemed hateful and fragile. At last, she stopped. Before her stretched a quiet city, half shrouded in early mist. She froze, confusion tightening her chest. Where was she? A sudden flash of light burst from the heart of the city, and pain tore through her skull. She clutched her head and staggered as memories surged. Faces, gods, the clang of metal, the blood oath. When the visions cleared, she looked again and knew this was Bloodhaven. The pull she'd been following was not divine command at all. It was the blood bond calling her home. Demoness began walking down toward the village, hatred for the divine boiling in her veins, even though this was her home. What was that light she had seen? Could it be the divine she hunted for? She stayed to the shadows as she approached the source of the glow, her senses sharp and feral. There, by the riverbank, stood a figure with their back to her, calmly skipping stones across the water. Their armor shimmered faintly with holy light, and at their hip hung a sword that pulsed with quiet power. She crept closer, ready to strike, but as she raised her hand to strike the killing blow, the sword flared, and suddenly her vision cleared. The fury fell away, replaced by calm recognition. "Greetings, brother," she said softly, blinking the haze from her eyes. The figure turned slightly, the faintest smile crossing his face. "Greetings, sister. How are you this night?" Grand Marshal Voidlock's voice was calm, patient, full of understanding. Demoness hesitated. "Confused," she admitted. "Why are you confused?" he asked, skipping another stone. "You're of the light. The clan is of the light," she snapped, throwing her hands up. "I am of the dark. Why don't you condemn me? Why don't you treat me like the vile thing I've become?" Voidlock didn't react to her outburst. He simply continued skipping stones until her voice quieted. Then gently, he held one out to her, a small, flat piece of river rock. "You can't skip just any stone," he said, his tone soft but steady. "It must be perfectly balanced, flat on both sides. Only then can it glide across the water." Demoness turned the stone in her hand, studying it as he spoke. "It's the same with you and me," Voidlock continued. "You can't have light without shadow, and you can't have shadow without light. Together they form balance. One cannot exist without the other." He flicked another stone across the river. It danced across the surface, leaving ripples that shimmered in the moonlight. Demoness stood quietly for a moment, humbled. "Thank you, brother," she said at last, her voice low. "I really mean it." She tried to imitate his motion, throwing the stone, but it only made a loud splash. Voidlock chuckled softly. Demoness growled, half embarrassed, and melted back into the shadows, the echo of his laughter following her into the night. Demoness stood quietly for a moment, humbled. "Thank you, brother," she said at last, her voice low. "I really mean it." She tried to imitate his motion, throwing the stone, but it only made a loud splash. Voidlock chuckled softly. Mortals and their strange magic Demoness growled and melted back into the shadows, the echo of his laughter following her into the night. Demoness stood quietly for a moment, humbled. "Thank you, brother," she said at last, her voice low. "I really mean it." She tried to imitate his motion, throwing the stone, but it only made a loud splash. Voidlock chuckled softly. "Mortals and their strange magic," Demoness growled and melted back into the shadows. The echo of his laughter followed her into the night. She found herself wandering the sleeping city by moonlight and retreating to the temple's darkest corners by day. The dark fire beat in her chest like a ceaseless drum, planting violent thoughts and whispered fears. To spill blood, to hunt the divine, to rend anyone who stood in its way. It pushed and pulled, trying to drag her from the safety of Bloodhaven. On one such day, as she paced the temple's shadowed corridors, the blood bond flared urgent and bright. The Grand Marshal had called a meeting. She moved at once, the black folds of her robes trailing like smoke, and joined the others gathered around Grand Marshal Voidlock Graveheart. When everyone had arrived, and an expectant hush settled over Bloodhaven's protectors, he stepped forward. His voice carried over the crowd. "Today, brothers and sisters, we have troubling news." He paused, taking in their faces, then continued. "The white ravens that have been circling the skies of late have become territorial over the resources of Demoness. They've begun hunting for sport, killing without need. We tolerated them when they took what they required, but now they threaten the free and innocent people of Gallia." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, concern, agreement. "So, what do we do? Dinner?" someone joked. But the mood remained tense. Voidlock's mouth twitched. He allowed himself a brief smile before settling back into the steady command they trusted. "No. We patrol, we protect, we defend those who cannot defend themselves. And if push comes to shove, feathers will fly. Until the flock leaves their nests, or ceases to be a threat to Gallia's citizens." Heads nodded. Swords clanged on shields. Healers murmured ready spells. The community readied itself. They were ready to defend. She was ready to kill. Demoness joined the patrol as Grand Marshal Voidlock led them to the first iron mine. The place was a ruin of feathers and filth white down, tangled in broken tools, bird droppings smeared over every surface. It was clear the ravens had claimed the mine as their own. A flicker of movement caught the marshal's eye, a white raven slipping behind a rock. He approached cautiously. The air erupted in screeching chaos. Dozens of ravens burst into the open, wings thrashing, claws slashing, their cries sharp as blades. They dove for Voidlock, beaks aimed for his eyes. The Brotherhood moved instantly, steel and spell colliding with feather and talon. Blood and light flashed across the mine as the ground became a storm of feathers and broken wings. When the last raven fell, silence returned wet and heavy. Each patrol thinned the flock further. With every victory, the miners crept back to reclaim their livelihoods, hope returning little by little. Until the day the flock struck back, they came in force. a sky-darkening swarm, descending with murderous fury. It was them, or the patrol, a battle for survival and the freedom of Gallia. The Blood Brothers charged to meet them, and the field erupted into chaos. Feathers, fangs, magic, and steel clashed in a blinding tempest. Screams tore through the air, man and beast alike. Demoness felt the black fire surge within her, igniting into a consuming inferno. She gave herself to it, cutting through the flock with relentless precision. The air filled with falling bodies, burning feathers and blood. When the last few ravens broke and fled, she pursued, eyes wild, hands aflame, until Voidlock's commanding voice cut through the frenzy, calling her back. Breathing hard, she returned to the battlefield. The ground was littered with corpses, white feathers soaked crimson, torn wings twitching in the dirt. The surviving patrol tended to their wounded. Healers whispered spells through tears and exhaustion. Demoness crouched beside one of her kin who had fallen, his body still warm. His spirit hovered close, uncertain, fading. She placed a hand on his chest, found the thread of his blood bond, and reached beyond the veil. Her essence wrapped around his soul and dragged it back. He gasped, awake, eyes wide with life. Demoness winced and bit back a cry, the act of mercy burning through her. The light seared where the black fire lived, pain blooming in her chest like molten glass. They were safe from the birds now, but as she clutched her heart and felt the darkness stir beneath her skin, she wondered, were they safe from her? They returned to Bloodhaven, battered and bruised, but victorious, their deeds spreading like wildfire. People came seeking shelter and aid, and the once small refuge swelled with the grateful, the wounded, and the wary alike. Peace seemed to settle over the land. The Brotherhood ventured to distant villages, and traders from across Gallia came to Bloodhaven's bustling market. From her perch, atop Araknava's great web, Demoness would watch them mortals moving through their fragile lives, laughing, bartering, dreaming. And for a moment, she could almost forget what she was. But beneath the peace, she could feel it, the slow pulse of corruption, threading through the land, unseen and unfelt by the living. The black fire within her fed upon it, whispering, growing, tightening its grip. Each day the hunger was harder to resist. What am I to do? She wondered. Am I doomed to carry this curse forever? Must I destroy all I love, just to be free? She thought of speaking to the Grand Marshal. But how could she tell him that the darkness within her yearned to burn the world he fought so hard to protect? He would not understand. By day, uncertainty gnawed at her. By night, the same dream plagued her endless war against the divine, her claws sinking into holy flesh as the world burned around her. Her nerves were raw, her soul fraying at the edges. When the call of the blood bond flared to life, she felt it resonate deep in her chest, a summons from her kin, from her commander. Without hesitation, Demoness and the other loyal protectors of Bloodhaven gathered once more beneath the crimson banners, where Grand Marshal Voidlock Graveheart awaited them. Demoness stood among the gathered defenders as Grand Marshal Voidlock Graveheart waited for the crowd to settle. The murmurs faded until the square was silent. the only sound the low hum of anticipation. "Our allies are in danger," he began, his voice steady and commanding. "We are a free people. We bow to no king, no queen, and no tyrant. That freedom is what allows us to protect the innocent, the free people of Gallia." A ripple of agreement spread through the crowd, nods, clenched fists, the sound of gauntlets tightening around weapon hilts. "However," Voidlock continued, his tone darkening, "there is a clan called Ravenhall, ruled by a so-called King Elric. They have grown greedy, expanding their reach, demanding tribute from villages that were never his. Our allies are among them. They have called to us for aid." He paused, scanning the faces before him. Warriors, mages, healers, scouts his people. "Will you stand with me?" he thundered. "Will you fight for our allies, for freedom, and for Gallia itself?" The square erupted. Swords clanged against shields. Spears thrust toward the sky. Healers lifted their hands, casting light that shimmered like dawn over the crowd. Demoness roared with them, the sound shaking her to her core, though the black fire deep within her pulsed in response, its hunger whispering of blood, of ruin, of destiny. Voidlock raised his blade high, the sun catching its edge. "Then let us ride for freedom, for Gallia." And with that, he led them a storm of steel and faith toward the distant lands where their allies waited, and where fate awaited them all. As they arrived in Armagnac, their footfalls echoed along the empty dirt road, bouncing off quiet, shuttered buildings. Curtains twitched at the edges of windows. Children's wide eyes peeked out, staring at the armed procession with a mix of fear and hope. "This way! This way!" An elderly villager called urgently, catching Demoness's attention. She drifted her gaze from the children and silently followed the group to the town hall, where the villagers huddled together in anxious clusters. "Thank you for coming," one said as soon as the Brotherhood stepped inside. His hands trembled as he spoke. "Ravenhall is demanding tribute again, but we barely have enough to survive. We're only a small village. We will die if we try to stand against the king's army." He sounded close to breaking, desperation thick in his voice. "Be at peace, my friends," Voidlock answered firmly, placing a steadying hand on the man's shoulder. "We are here now, and we have stood against far worse than a few armed men and a tyrant's threats." The reassurance steadied the room. The villagers sagged into relieved silence. Demoness did not stay with them. She slipped out, scaled the side of the town hall like shadowed smoke, and perched atop the roof, watching. Below her, her kin positioned themselves in protective half-circles around the hall's entrance spearmen. Sword-bearers, healers preparing their spells. No one would touch these villagers without spilling their blood first. She would make certain of that. Demoness lifted her gaze to the horizon. The tall grass rippled under the breeze, green waves rolling with each gust. The branches of the nearby trees swayed, their leaves rustling softly. The air smelled sweet flower nectar, fresh dew, the quiet breath of a village clinging to its peace. Then, the scent changed. The sweetness soured, replaced by the rank aura of arrogance, the stink of ambition. and the greasy musk of sweaty mortals, hiding behind polished armor and empty pride. Demoness's nostrils flared. Her eyes narrowed to black slits. "We have company," she barked, her voice cracking like a whip across the street. Heads turned just as a formation emerged through the wavering fields Ravenhall's elite. Their armor gleamed. Their banners snapped sharply in the wind. They marched with the arrogance of men who believed the land, and everyone on it already belonged to them. Demoness smiled, baring her teeth. "Let them come." They stopped before the town hall, the commander stepping forward with puffed-up importance. "By order of King Elric," he called, "we command you to come out and pay your tribute to the kingdom." Silence fell for a heartbeat. Then Grand Marshal Voidlock Graveheart replied, voice steady and unbothered, "We acknowledge no king. Therefore, we owe no tribute." Gasps rippled through the Ravenhall soldiers. They shuffled uneasily until one shouted, "It's the heretics!" Demoness grinned wickedly from her rooftop perch. Oh, how she adored that word on mortal tongues. "I demand that you come out and face us, you scourge," the commander barked. "Now, why would I do that?" Voidlock answered lazily. "When it's perfectly comfortable in here. Come inside. Sit. Let us discuss this like civilized people." The soldiers immediately drew closer together, shields bumping. "It's a trap, my lord," one hissed. Dust spiraled along the road as the wind picked up, carrying the thick, sharp tension between both sides. Then a priest stepped forward, robes fluttering. "By the power of the divine," he shouted, "come out and face us." The word divine hit Demoness like a spark to oil. Her eyes went fully black. Her heart roared with fire. "Your divine will die by my hand," she shrieked, the black flame inside her erupting to life. The celebration carried on into the evening, mugs raised, stories exchanged, and hope rekindled in a village that had nearly lost it. The village elder clasped Voidlock's forearm gratefully. "Thank you," he said, voice shaking with emotion. Yet even as he spoke, his eyes darted nervous, uncertain toward Demoness. She caught the look. She only smiled in reply, a slow, dangerous curl of the lips before letting her form slip back into the dark. Shadows welcomed her like old friends. From her perch among them she watched, silent and unseen, as the people of Bloodhaven and Armenhack sat together to plan. Trade routes, mutual defense, a future free of Ravenhall's grip. Their hope warmed the room. Her fire did not. It pulsed in her chest, steady as a heart, hungry as a beast. "Kill the divine." The whisper was always there, like breath on the back of her neck. She listened to their talks, but her mind was elsewhere, mapping the roads that led to Ravenhall, the weaknesses in their walls, the fastest way to reach the divine's inner sanctum. She imagined each guard she would cut down, each barrier she would tear through, each holy ward she would shatter. She imagined the moment she would finally stand before the divine and end them. When dawn painted the sky with pale gold, the Brotherhood prepared to return home. The villagers gathered to see them off with gratitude and renewed courage. Demoness walked with them, her robes whispering faintly, her eyes fixed far beyond the horizon. She would protect her kin. She would fight for Gallia. But always, beneath it all, she planned, calculated, waited, Because no matter how many battles they won, no matter how many people they saved, her path ended in only one place, with the Divine's blood on her hands. The Ravenhall ranks recoiled, arrogance drained from their faces, replaced by the sharp, metallic tang of fear. "You'll never get near the Divine," one of them shouted, his voice cracking. Demoness smiled, slow and merciless. "Try me," she hissed. "The Divine will die, and you cannot stop me." Black heat rippled off her like a living thing. Before the exchange could tip into slaughter, one of her kin released an arrow. It struck the ground before the soldiers with a bone-jarring thud, gouging a crater and spitting gravel up their shins. "Protect the king!" someone screamed. Their formation collapsed inward, shields quivering, the proud line shrinking like prey, cornered by a predator. They finally recognized, too late. "You will rue the day you crossed us, heathens," a voice roared as they fled around the bend in the dirt road, boots pounding, breaths ragged. Demoness watched them go, head tilting, eyes half-lidded in hungry disdain. The black fire swirling in her chest cooled from a roar to a sinister simmer, settling but never dying. Only then did she step off the roof. She landed without a sound, as if she was made only of shadows and spiders. Her brothers and sisters welcomed her with triumphant shouts, and the villagers, shaking but grateful, pressed food and drink into their hands. Demoness accepted it all with diplomatic dignity, sharing her food and drink with her many spiders. Demoness had been preparing in silence. Supplies hidden away in the cracks of old ruins, maps memorized, patrol routes overheard, poisons acquired from merchants who knew better than to ask questions. Every step a quiet piece of a far louder intention. The black fire inside her throbbed, hungry, impatient. One night, as she lingered near the potion stall's hood low, eyes shadowed, she heard a voice cut through the murmuring crowd. Demoness, Grand Marshal Voidlock Graveheart, stood at the edge of the market light, silver sigils glowing faintly across his armor. His presence pressed against her senses, bright, holy, suffocating. She turned her face slightly away. His radiance was beginning to hurt. "Greetings, brother," she said softly. He stepped closer, concern folding lines across his usually unshakable expression. "I have noticed," he began slowly, carefully, "that you have developed an interest in King Elric and Ravenhall." Her jaw tensed. He waited for her reaction, watching her with the eyes of someone who missed nothing. "They are dangerous," he continued, "and you have not been yourself." Demoness felt the black fire twist within her, snarling at his scrutiny. "I just want to get to know them," she muttered, forcing a smile that felt wrong on her face. "Maybe spar with them." The last word rolled out of her throat in a low, guttural growl she hadn't intended. Voidlock's posture changed instantly, paladin instincts snapping to the surface like armor slamming into place. His spine straightened. His aura flared with a cold, righteous brilliance, a blade of light drawn and leveled. "Demoness," he said, voice firm, resonant, iron-willed. A voice meant to command armies. "I forbid you to go to Ravenhall." The words struck her like a warhammer. The bond between them detonated, white-hot, searing through her arteries like liquid sunlight. The black fire inside her screamed in reply, feral, ravenous, unshackled, slamming itself against her ribs as if trying to claw its way out. Light and shadow collided inside her like two gods locked in a death match. Her vision fractured, her breath hitched. For a heartbeat, she wasn't sure if she was going to kneel or rip out her own throat just to quiet the storm. "I don't know what you're planning," Voidlock continued, stepping closer, the light in him pressing against her like a holy weight. "But for your safety, and for the safety of Bloodhaven, I forbid it." She felt the black fire snarl at the word forbid. A tremor crawled down her spine. Her nails bit into her palms hard enough to draw blood. Somewhere distant, she registered her jaw grinding until it almost cracked. She forced herself upright, forced each breath to be slow, controlled, human. "Okay," she whispered. The word was almost too soft, almost calm, but beneath it, coiled tight, was something cold, something unstable, something that hummed like a blade on the verge of shattering. "I won't go near Ravenhall," he exhaled, relief softening his aura. She didn't turn to look at him, because if she did, she wasn't sure if the light would keep her steady, or if the black fire would take the chance to sink its teeth into him first. She walked off into the night, her shadow stretching long and wrong behind her, toward the temple, toward the waiting dark, and away from the light she had once tried to reach. She retreated into the catacombs beneath the temple, stone corridors where daylight rarely intruded and shadows clung like old memories. Down there, time stood still. Her footsteps seemed muted, as if the darkness wanted to swallow every trace of her existence. Her soul pulled in too, constantly, relentlessly. The strain never let up. Each night, the nightmares deepened. The burning eye watched her from a sky of smoke. Dead bodies fell around her like rain. The world morphed, burnt, and crumbled until it became the endless wasteland in hell. She always woke, gasping, drenched in sweat, clutching at the silence around her. But the catacombs offered no comfort, only the quiet breathing of stone and the pounding of the black fire inside her ribs. One half of her was drawn irresistibly to murder the divine. The other half was a white-hot, bone-deep command anchoring her to the spot. She could not move toward the divine, and she could not stop wanting to. The war inside her hollowed her out day by day. Darkness gnawed at her soul, whispering, urging, forcing its will into the cracks where light no longer reached. The bond pulled back with equal strength, searing her every time the black fire pushed too hard. She endured it in her usual cold, calm breathing. Slow, expression blank, until one night the tension snapped. Pain speared through her, sudden and violent, ripping up her spine so sharply her breath shattered. Her knees buckled. A ragged scream tore out of her before she could swallow it. She collapsed onto the cold stone floor. Darkness surged up, merciful in its cruelty, swallowing her whole as consciousness slipped. She felt movement, soft, skittering across her arms, her legs, her throat. shadows gathering, tiny legs weaving. The spiders covered her gently, deliberately, threading silk over her limbs, her face, her chest. In the dark beneath the temple, wrapped in whispering silk and shadow, Demoness finally succumbed and melted into the shadow realm. She had been drifting for a while. Her senses had been dulled, like everything was far, far away. She opened her eyes. She was in an old, crumbling building, half-collapsed beams, rotted walls. She could see mildew and a thick layer of eerie fog. "Water," someone hissed. Demoness followed the voice to find a lost soul at the water's edge, but unable to drink. She found a way out of the building. Finding the fog moved lazily over the landscape, hiding everything more than a few yards from sight. Shapes moved in the fog. Lost souls, wandering, drifting, hollow. They shuffled through the encampment like sleepwalkers, their translucent forms flickering with every step. These were not demons or damned spirits she recognized. These were souls who had never left. They were attached to the buildings, still fighting a war that had ended eons ago. They never moved on, never found peace. Demoness gently placed her hand on the shoulder of one of them. He jumped and looked around for the threat. "I mean no harm," Demoness said softly. "What is your name?" Before he could answer, they both turned towards the sound of boots crunching on gravel. The fog stirred. Madness broke like a snapped wire. "Invader!" a soul shrieked as two mortals emerged from the fog, wide-eyed and pale. "Ghosts!" one of them shouted. "Be gone!" the soul shrieked as it hurled itself at them. The pair fought with frantic willpower and wild swings, their armor taking hits and their weapons striking true. With a final, piercing scream, the soul collapsed and dissolved into mist that swirled and slowly began to take shape again, for it was never truly free of this place. The mortals caught their breath while searching the ectoplasm of the fallen soul, bolstered by their win, feeling unbeatable. They turned towards Demoness. "Ugh, nasty," one of them muttered, shaking off a shiver. Then he pointed at Demoness. "That must be a boss. Just look at it. It's just standing there." Her lip curled back over her teeth. A boss. They thought she was like the other lost soul, disposable, lootable. She growled low, warning them away. "Should we get it?" one whispered. "Yeah, it might have something juicy." Demoness snarled. "Do not do this." "Ooh, it talks. Creepy." The men exchanged a grin. "All right. Let's get it." They charged her, with weapons drawn, blades whistling through the mist. But Demoness had fought armies. She had torn through flocks of ravenous beasts. She had stood before paladins and survived. These two were nothing. Her talons erupted from her fingertips. Fangs descended. With a roar that shook the fog itself, she met their attack head-on, her claws slicing through armor and flesh like parchment. "Aha! It hits like a truck," one screamed as they crumpled. Their bodies fell still. Demoness breathed hard, staring at the strange glowing motes drifting from their corpses. Little firefly-like sparks that twirled lazily in the mist. She stepped back, frowning. The men's bodies flickered. Then, just as she turned to walk away, She heard whispers behind her as the two mortals rematerialized in the fog, clearly having respawned and creeping back toward their fallen loot. She pretended not to see them as they tiptoed behind her, snatching up the glowing fireflies from their own corpses. Whatever this place was, it was not hell, but it certainly wasn't life either. Everything fell quiet after the mortals fled. Demoness remained still, watching the lost souls drift through the fog. Only now did she see the truth. They weren't hunting, weren't searching. They were living, or trying to, standing guard, wandering set paths, whispering half-formed words, moving through the motions of a life they no longer remembered having. They didn't even seem to know they were dead. As she stood among them, the light faded from the sky. Night settled across the land like a soft blanket. The moon rose, pale and swollen, turning the fog into a shimmering veil that seemed to breathe with a life of its own. A howl echoed in the far distance, long, wavering, mournful. Then came the sounds of huffing and snuffling, the heavy footfalls of a bear passing nearby, nose twitching as it searched for berries, but sneezed violently when the fog rolled into its face. It lumbered away, grumbling. The noises of the night stirred something deep in Demoness's mind. A memory, thin as smoke, rippled through her. The fog, the glowing mist, the wandering spirits. She knew this place, these lost souls, this pale moonlight, this eternal half-night, where the dead never slept, the ghostlands of Gallia. She was still in Gallia, and yet she had no body. A cold dread crept through her. Was she herself a lost soul? Is that why the mortals had attacked her, seen her as a boss, a threat, a ghost? She tried to remember her name, her face, the weight of her body, the burn of the black fire, but everything slipped through her fingers like fog. Memories lingered just out of reach, taunting her with their closeness. She didn't know how long she stayed among the dead. Time didn't behave here. Moments bled into days, days into nothing. When you were a wandering soul drifting the shadow realm, time was just another thing you lost. One night, she jolted awake. Not that she slept, not truly, but something shook her. A sudden, icy chill speared through her incorporeal form. The fog around her thickened, whirling with a violence she hadn't felt since the night her body died. A razor-edged wind tore straight through her, carrying with it a voice thin, dissonant, dripping with ancient malice. Kill, kill, kill the divine. Destroy the mortal realm. Demoness went still. No, she breathed, though even she heard the hollowness in her voice. It can't be. But the truth curled cold and certain inside her. Her soul was bound to the darkness, and now, stripped of flesh, stripped of blood, she had nothing to anchor it, nothing to hold back the hunger. The darkness surged. She tried to resist, clawed at her fading sense of self, tried to remember who she had been, who she had loved, what she had fought for. But the harder she fought, the more the hatred bled into her, seething, venomous, endless. Her outline wavered. Her features melted into shadow until she was no longer a woman, no longer a demoness, but a black silhouette of pure vengeance, a wraith forged from grief and fury, a hunter, born from darkness. And so she began to hunt the divine, to hunt the living, to hunt anything that dared to shine with light. She slipped into the fog like a nightmare returning home, and the ghostlands trembled as her hunt began. As a wraith of pure darkness drifting through the shadow realm, Demoness saw the world in a new and terrible way. Energies shimmered through the land like scent trails, made visible threads of color winding over soil and stone, each belonging to a different deity. Mortals still whispered prayers to. She followed them one by one, tasting their resonance. But when she found the sharp white trail, bright as a blade and stinking of sanctity, she hissed low, feral, and lunged after it. She ran fast, faster than wind, faster than thought. Her drive to kill had devoured everything else. The trail led her to a city. Its walls glowed with swirling white light, misty and holy. The nearer she crept, the more it burned her shadow flesh. But she endured it with a snarl. Demoness slipped through the streets like a living absence, silent, weightless, deadly. Guards patrolled in pairs, lanterns trembling in their hands, but none saw her. Her eyes were locked on the great cathedral rising from the center of the city like a sanctified mountain. That was where the divine waited. Guards stood at every gate. Wards shimmered along every doorway. The white mist was thick here, so bright it felt like acid against her skinless form. It was now or never. She crouched low in the shadows, waiting, watching. A guard opened the cathedral door, and with a roar that rattled the bells in the tower, she charged. Her claws tore through the first guard before he even registered the movement. The alarm erupted instantly, shouts, clashing steel, the tolling of warning bells. She slammed into the wards. They shattered in a burst of white sparks. She ran straight for the divine. A sword slashed across her side, carving a streak of dark smoke from her form. She whirled, tore the offending god apart, and pushed onward, roaring with pure hatred. A spear pierced her shoulder, pinning her shadow flesh for a heartbeat. But she ripped it free and hurled herself forward again. She was almost there. She lunged. Light and darkness collided. The divine met her charge head-on, radiant as a sunburst. The impact sent a shockwave through the cathedral windows, exploded outward, glass spraying the streets like deadly hail. Guards were thrown across the marble floor. Citizens outside screamed and fled as tremors tore through the city. The ground cracked. The walls shook. The sky trembled. The divine faltered under the assault, losing control, its light flickering, sputtering. Then the sky tore open. Every soul ever trapped in hell came pouring through the rupture, howling, clawing, flooding the mortal realm in an avalanche of spirits. Demoness fought harder than she had ever fought in life or death. Fury drove her, grief fueled her, and the Dark Lord, ancient, feral, terrible, rose within her shadow, lending her power. The divine retaliated with vicious sanctity, ripping at her soul, trying to erase her completely. trying to unmake the darkness inside her. But she would not break. Not now. Not ever. The struggle built to a blinding crescendo, and with an explosion like a dying star, the divine crumpled in on itself, its form collapsing, its light extinguishing. Only its staff remained, fallen, silent. And then the world went dark, truly dark. No sky, no Sunday, no moon, no ground, nothing, just the void. And her two enormous eyes opened before her, vast as mountains, staring from the void. They looked like the eye of hell she had once known. But this time, they did not burn. You did well, little demon. The voice boomed, shaking the darkness. Demoness, now free of the rage that had hollowed her out, looked around in fear, then heartbreak. I did well, she whispered, voice trembling. I destroyed the world. I destroyed everyone I loved. Silence answered her at first, stretching long and heavy. Then the booming voice returned, softer. I am the Dark Lord. Remember me. Demoness lifted her gaze toward the colossal eyes. Her hands curled into fists, her face tight with grief over what she believed she had done. The divine was corrupt, the Dark Lord said. Again and again it destroyed the world without hesitation, wiping it clean to begin anew, like an experiment. This I could not allow. Memories surged, screaming souls raining into hell, trapped as worlds crumbled over and over again. You, little demon, are very stubborn, the Dark Lord rumbled, and you caught the attention of my friend, Arachnavar. Demoness's eyes widened at the name. A soft, familiar rustling whispered through the void. Then Arachnavar appeared, an enormous black widow spider, her legs moving with eerie grace as she stepped beside the mountain-sized eyes. We needed someone who carried both dark and light, Arachnavar said, her voice soft and deadly. So when the woman sacrificed the husk of the baby, I pierced its chest and removed its heart before preparing it to receive your soul. Demoness pressed a hand to her chest, confusion tightening her breath. Why? She whispered. Because, the Dark Lord thundered, the Queen of Death and I made a pact over your soul. Your soul belonged to the dark, but your heart was kept safe with Arachnavar. Demoness began to pace, anguish cracking her voice. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter anyway, she cried. It's gone. My kin gone. Everything I fought for gone. The giant eyes blinked slowly. That is where you are wrong, little demon, the voice said gently. You tore yourself apart before harming your kin. Your love for mortals outweighed your desire for evil. Even as darkness consumed your soul, your heart remained untouched. Something moved in the void. A cocoon of webbing emerged from the darkness, carried by thousands of spiders. Inside lay a familiar form. Demoness's breath caught. The spiders kept your body fresh, my child, Arachnavar said. It is time to return to it. Demoness reached toward the body and felt herself plummet, falling from a great height. She plunged into flesh, gasping as she tore free from the web cocoon, lungs burning with the shock of existence. Arachnavar approached, holding a small, wrapped object. It twitched. No, it beat. The heartbeat quickened, matching the strange shadow pulse inside her chest. Demoness saw then the faint thread of energy connecting the wrapped heart to her own. "You have completed your task," the Dark Lord said. "Your soul is now your own." Demoness felt the darkness fall away like heavy chains snapping free and crumbling at her feet. "You have done your task and lived," Arachnavar added. "Your heart is now your own. But be warned, it is a black heart. You will always be cursed to hear the voices of the dead and dying, for no sin is greater than slaying the divine and ending the mortal world." Arachnavar pressed the black, beating heart into her chest. Demoness collapsed, screaming without sound as a storm of voices, memories, and emotions flooded her. An endless roar of death and suffering. "Look at me," Arachnavar commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Breathe, focus, calm, silent." The torrent dulled, the screams softened into a distant murmur, ever present but bearable. A pull, bright and true, washed over her. She knew that pull. It was the pull of the blood bond. Demoness pushed herself to her feet. "Now," the Dark Lord said, his voice fading into the void, "open your eyes." Everything went black. Then a breeze, leaves stirring, birds calling overhead, the trickle of a stream nearby. Demoness opened her eyes. She was in Bloodhaven. Her kin lived. They were rebuilding the city, alive, safe, breathing. All the emotions she had held back surged at once, and she fell to her knees, sobbing. She had not lost anyone. She had saved them. The love and protective instincts overwhelmed her. These were her mortals, and she would move heaven and hell to protect them. And now, if one listened carefully, very carefully, one could hear the free spirits whispering in the wind. The end.